Neverwar, Mage Saga Book 9, written and narrated by J.J. Green. Chapter 1. Wet, groggy, cold. Carina opened her eyes and immediately started shivering. She'd been through this same scenario countless times over the years, but the repeated experiences didn't make it any easier. She couldn't see a thing. A blurry veil shrouded her vision, yet she knew what she was looking at, the inner wall of the deep sleep chamber she had stepped into 3 years previously. She hoped it was 3 years, and that nothing had gone wrong to shorten or prolong her time in stasis. "How do you feel?" Bryce. She remembered he'd been scheduled to wake up a week before her. "I can't see a thing." "I'll wipe your eyes." She felt a soft cloth move over her eyelids. When she opened her eyes again, she could make out his dark figure leaning over her. He took her arm. "This way, Mum. Your carriage awaits." She chuckled as she climbed out of the chamber, his grip steadying her. He wrapped a blanket around her and she sat in the A-Grav medic chair. Bryce would take her to sick bay for a checkup, and then she would spend the next few days recovering. Her digestive system would start functioning again, and her heart would become accustomed to beating at its normal rate, not the beat per hour of deep sleep. Stasis dreams, wild, colourful escapades of her imagination, impossible scenarios, fantastical creatures, visions of people long dead, would fade from her memory. They were already slipping away, providing she suffered no permanent after effects. In less than a week, she would be entirely back to normal, as if she hadn't spent years unconscious, leaping forward in time. How different this was than her first experience of deep sleep, when the Regians had taken over the ship and put Lomang and Mezban in charge. Then she had been hauled from her chamber, freezing and slippery, by the giant Papu, and the Lotokrillans had killed Cadwallader in cold blood, before the man even had the chance to wake up. She bowed her head. Bryce put a hand on her shoulder. "Thinking about Cadwallader?" She nodded. He squeezed her shoulder. It was the same every time. Whenever she woke from deep sleep, she was reminded of the Lieutenant Colonel's death, though it had happened decades ago and light years across the galaxy. So many had died. Atoy, her long-time merc comrade, Jace, the wise, patient, kind mage who had helped her so much, Stevenson, the Duchess's pilot, and her port in the stormy sea of her youth, Vigo Justus, the Honourable Lotokrillan, Calverley, the former Shura officer, Halliday, who had protected Darius with his own body during the glider crash on Magog, and Captain Speedle, who had been like a second father to her. There had been more deaths, more than she wanted to recall. Had it been worth it? Bryce hadn't said anything. He was probably waiting for her to come around fully before he gave her the news. The mind took time to adjust during the first days after deep sleep, and facts would slip in and out of memory. She would find out the news soon enough. Yet even if they'd succeeded, on a deeper level, her question had no answer. Cadwallader, Atoy, Stevenson and Halliday had been black dogs who knew the risks of the lives they'd chosen. Vigo and Calverley had been military men too. Jace had been a civilian, but he'd also been a mage, and the mage creed was that they helped each other, always. Was her goal worth the sacrifice of those who had helped to achieve it? She didn't know the answer, no matter what happened. Fogginess invaded her thoughts, and she slipped into a doze. When she woke again, she was in sickbay, and people near her were talking. "Shh! Oh look, you went and woke her up, just like I said you would." "Sorry, Carina." She smiled. Her brothers and sisters were standing around her bed. "It's all right, Fern. No need to tell Darius off. It's good to see you all again. Is everyone okay? How time had changed them. During the periods they'd spent out of deep sleep on the long journey, everyone had aged. Tracking the passing birthdays during long-distance space travel was impossible. But Darius had grown into a young man, dashingly handsome and as sweet-tempered as ever, while Nala was about 20 and very serious. Fern and Oriana were in their mid-20s. As they'd gone through puberty, Fern had shot up, but Oriana had stayed the same height, a fact Fern enjoyed reminding her about frequently. Parthenia had moved into her 30s and had grown to resemble their mother so much that sometimes the sight of her gave Carina pangs of grief. "We're all fine," Parthenia said. "I was allowed out of bed this morning. How do you feel?" Carina pushed herself upright. "I could almost say I'm getting used to deep sleep." "Don't say that," Darius warned. "You'll jinx it and we'll have to do it again." "No way," Oriana whined. "I'm never getting into one of those chambers again. It's like dying, and you never really know if you'll wake up." Though the risk of dying was small, it was one of the dangers of deep sleep. Sadly, one time they had lost a black dog. It was a big relief to know Bryce and her siblings had been successfully revived. "So," she said, "is anyone going to tell me what's happening? Did we make it?" Darius was about to say something, but Parthenia interrupted him. "Before we answer that, we have something to show you. I'll just check with Clarkson that we can take you out." The doctor grudgingly gave her permission. However, she stipulated that Carina was not to walk anywhere due to the danger of falling and hurting herself. The Agrav seat was employed once again to take her out of the bay and into an elevator. "Where's Bryce?" she asked as they ascended. Nala replied, "He's with Shao, Jackson and Van Hasty on the bridge. They're going over the scan data. It's very interesting." Naturally, Nala must have been examining the data too. She might have changed physically over the years, but she remained as inquisitive as ever, to the point of positively snooping. "In what way is it interesting?" "We can talk about that when you're back to normal," Parthenia replied. "What we're about to show you will be enough for today." They were going to the uppermost deck of the Bathsheba, and Carina knew exactly what that meant. Excitement began to build in her stomach. The elevator doors opened, and surrounded by her siblings, she maneuvered her chair down the passageway. They halted outside the doors to the Twilight Dome. How often had she been here, looking out at the starscape? So many events had taken place in the space beyond those doors. They went inside. The lights were out. The only illumination was the starlight shining in through the transparent roof. Except stars were not the only things shining out in the velvety blackness of space. She moved to the center of the room and looked up. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Darius whispered. Shao had positioned the ship so the object occupied the middle of the wide view. A sapphire and emerald orb, swathed in pearl-white clouds, sat among the stars. It is. It was the most beautiful planet she had ever seen. Earth. Chapter 2. "Hey, Lin, you look like shit." Van Hasty's greeting as Carina stepped onto the bridge made her smile. "You look worse. Did you spend the past 5 years awake?" "Nah, I only feel like I did." How old was the merc now? She had to be in her early 40s. The long voyage had weighed heavily on the black dogs. The military men and women hadn't dealt well with years of inactivity. They thrived on action and risk, yet there had been little else to do since leaving their last port of call, Sot Loza, except spend time with other people. Not their greatest strength. Carina's family had fared better. They'd grown up, developed their self-identities, and honed their skills. They were ready for whatever new adventure awaited them on Earth. "Don't pay any attention to her," said Xiao. "You look great." Carina slid into a seat at a console and opened the screen. "Where are Bryce and Jackson?" "Checking for signs of damage." "Did something happen while we were in deep sleep?" The chances of an asteroid strike were tiny, but not non-existent. "There aren't any reports, but it doesn't hurt to get a visual." She brought up the files of data pertaining to Earth. "So, what do we know?" "A lot," the pilot replied. "Too much, almost. Have a look and you'll see what I mean." The scan data was interesting, as Nala had said. The most interesting thing about it was that it went back thousands of years. The Bathsheba scanners had been detecting attenuated, garbled comm signals, light years before the ship arrived in Earth's system. Earth was old. She recalled a meeting with Jason Cadwallader after the taking of the Bathsheba, where, with Jace's help, the lieutenant colonel had calculated 7,000 years had passed since mages left the planet. The data completely fit in with his guess. 7,000 years since her ancestors had left? It was an impossibly long time to imagine. Hundreds of generations of mages had lived and died, and she and her family were the first to return. What would they find? The stories of the mages leaving told of pitched battles, as the non-mages tried to force them to stay and fix the problems humanity had created for itself. A volatile climate, constant war, poverty and suffering for the vast majority of the population. But all the people could offer in return for the mages' help was persecution and servitude. They'd had no choice except to take advantage of the newly developed interstellar starship engines and depart, seeking worlds where they could live in freedom without fear. And look how well that turned out. "What do you think?" asked Xiao. "What's the plan?" "Stars, give me a minute." There was no plan. Their actions depended upon what they found upon arrival, and what they'd found was almost too much information to digest. As the Bathsheba had neared her ultimate destination, the data had become clearer and more recent, naturally. Over the long years, the ship's computer had done an excellent job of analyzing the language and translating it to universal. Carina searched the media broadcasts, personal conversations, entertainment shows, company communications, and educational programs for mentions of mages. There weren't many, but there were some. However, everything she read or heard pertained to the fabled image of her kind. Mages were imaginary beings from fairy tales, something akin to witches and wizards. There was no mention of casting except in relation to casting a spell. She saw nothing about the characters, and the only references to elixir related to something called the elixir of youth. It was all nonsense. Had humanity entirely forgotten about the real mages they'd driven away millennia ago? It seemed impossible. She felt she was missing a clue. "Are you going to sit there all day?" Xiao asked. "Decisions need to be made, Carina." She straightened her back and stretched out her arms, noting with surprise she'd been going over the data for a couple of hours. Before she could answer, the bridge door opened and Bryce and Jackson walked in. "Glad to see you finally paying us a visit," said Jackson. "Your bed got uncomfortable?" She rolled her eyes as Bryce leaned down for a kiss. "Everything shipshape?" "The old girl's holding up well. Just a few scratches still self-repairing on the hull." "Did you run an armaments check?" "Does Pamuk fart like a horse?" "All checked and ready for action." "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." Her brief dive into the wealth of data about Earth indicated it wasn't steeped in military conflict. Aside from some minor civil wars, the planet seemed relatively peaceful. Of course, information about defense capabilities wouldn't be available for cursory inspection. "Come on, Carina," said Xiao. "How are we going to do this? You've had the entire voyage to prepare. Introduce mages to Earth? That's going to take some thinking about." "No, I mean, where am I going to park this ship? She isn't exactly petite or hard to notice. Anyone watching the skies will pick us up soon, if they haven't already." "Ah, I see what you mean. I'll ask Darius to cloak us." "Will that work?" asked Bryce. "We'll try it. He can't cloak the Bathsheba indefinitely anyway. Someone's going to notice us eventually. We'll just have to deal with it when the time comes." "Xiao, I can see that Earth has a large tidally locked moon. After Darius has cast, take us to the far side. We can hide there while we figure things out." "Got it." Carina sent to her youngest brother to make the request. Now they'd finally arrived at their destination. Taking the next step felt hard. She had been focused on getting here, fighting to overcome all the obstacles that had stood in their way. Their actual arrival in Earth's system seemed anticlimactic, and the days ahead foggy and obscure. She had wanted to find a place where mages could live in the open without fear. Then they might finally be able to use their powers for good, to improve the state of humanity. But how to get to that point was a mystery. As if sensing her anxiety, Bryce said, "One step at a time." She breathed deeply and exhaled. "Yeah, one step at a time." Over the thousands of years that had passed following the mages' departure from their collapsing home planet, Earth's climate had stabilized. The cities had regrown, and technological development seemed to have resumed. The human population stood at 3.25 billion, the largest of any world Carina had ever known. No single power or organization governed the planet as far as she could tell. Even if there were a single entity to approach, she wasn't sure if that was wise. As the Bathsheba hung in geostationary orbit on the far side of Earth's moon, she pondered the facts over and over, the weight of her predicament growing heavier and heavier day by day, until one day, at the start of an active shift, Darius came to see her in her cabin. Bryce had gone to breakfast, and she was listening to the computer's translation of the latest broadcasts from Earth, trying to make sense of what she was hearing. Her brother leaned in at the open doorway, and immediately her heart lifted. Though she loved all her siblings equally, she shared a special bond with Darius, first forged when she had rescued him as a frightened child, tortured by Dirksen thugs. He was tall now, taller than Bryce and Fern, but to her he would always be that little boy who had entrusted an anonymous young merc with his life. "Hey, Carina, I saw you weren't at breakfast." "Not hungry. How are you doing? Come and talk to me. I'm sick of listening to this nonsense from Earth." He smiled at her invitation and sat next to her on the bed. "What nonsense is that?" I don't know. It's a news channel, but I can't make head nor tail of who they're talking about or why. What have you been doing?" "Well..." He paused and looked at her from under thick, dark brown bangs. "I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "Oh, you mean..." "Yeah. We're all waiting for you to decide what happens next." She grimaced. It was embarrassing. In all the years it had taken them to journey to Earth, she had had plenty of time to think through the possibilities of what they might find and come up with strategies to meet her goals. But now she was here, she had nothing to suggest. Darius said, "Maybe we should just go down there and see what happens. We could do that thing the military does." "Recon?" "Yeah. Reconnaissance would definitely be a good idea. There was only so much you could learn listening to broadcasts. In fact, lately she'd found the practice left her more confused than enlightened. Getting boots on the ground would reveal a whole lot more about human society on Earth. and what mages might reasonably expect in terms of treatment. Sending a team to the surface was the obvious move, but something held her back. Darius asked softly, "Are you worried about what might happen?" When her youngest brother asked questions like this, they were rhetorical, though he couldn't read her thoughts, or at least he'd never admitted to being able to do it. It was no secret that he knew how she felt. He knew how everyone in his immediate proximity felt. As a spirit mage, he couldn't help it. No one liked to mention his ability because it made everyone uncomfortable, including Darius. But they all knew it. "I guess I am a little worried. So many people died to get us here. What if it wasn't worth it? What if there's nothing for us on Earth? Lived out so many years just flying through space. Most of your childhood has been spent on a starship." Her words petered out. Darius wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "And I couldn't wish for a better one. I've grown up among the people I love. What could be better than that? Do you think I would have had a better time living with my father?" She sniffed. "Good point. I'll let you have that one. I think Mother would be so proud of you. Look at everything you've done. You saved her children from the Shurers, and you've done everything in your power to protect us, even to the extent of stealing a colony ship." "It wasn't exactly stealing," she demurred, in an effort to lighten the mood. Their mother was never far from her thoughts. He went on, "And you've brought us halfway across the galaxy to find us somewhere safe to live, somewhere we can be ourselves. Mother couldn't have asked any more from you, and neither do we. Neither does anyone on this ship. We all know the dangers, Carina, and if we didn't accept them, we wouldn't be here. We're with you, come what may." She was silent. "So you're sending down an away team today?" She swallowed. "Do I have a choice?" "Maybe you can choose who's going to be in it." "Thanks." "To an extent." Chapter 3. The argument had been going on too long. "Fern and Oriana," Carina snapped. "You're staying here, and that's the end of it. There will be plenty more opportunities to visit Earth. Heck, hopefully one day you'll live there, and you will have all the time in the world to explore. But for now we need mages aboard the ship." "So let Parthenia and Darius stay," Oriana whined, pouting. Carina had seen that pout many times over the years, but familiarity didn't make it any less irritating. "Parthenia is the oldest and most experienced of all of you, and Darius is the best at casting. That's why I've picked them, and whether you agree with it or not, that's my decision." "Leave it, sis," Fern said irritably. "You won't change her mind. You know what she's like." "What I'm like?" Darius said. "I don't mind sitting this one out if it'll make things easier." "It won't make anything easier," Carina replied. "You're coming." "And I suppose Bryce is going too?" Oriana asked. "Bryce is in the away team, yes. I suppose you don't like that either." "Figures." "Leave it, Oriana," Fern repeated. "Nala isn't coming either," Carina said. "She isn't complaining. Nala's more interested in analysing all the data from Earth," Oriana retorted. Fern tugged at her sleeve. "Let's go and find something else to do." "We've done everything there is to do around here," Oriana objected. 1,000 times over. "I want to walk on grass again, feel the wind, and look up into a blue sky." "And you will," Carina said, softening. Everyone on the Bathsheba felt the same. Though the ship was vast, living aboard her didn't compare to being planetside, and no one had been planetside in a very long time. "The next time the shuttle goes to Earth, you'll be on it, I promise." Oriana turned and left the bay without saying another word. Fern said. "She'll be all right soon enough. She's just bored, that's all." "I know. I understand. Good luck, everyone." Fern also left, passing Bryce as he entered. "What's up with Oriana?" Bryce asked. "She gave me her death glare in the passageway a minute ago." Parthenia replied, "She's just being herself. Who else are we waiting for, Carina?" "Shao's flying us down. Jackson and Pamuk are on their way too. Van Hasty's going to keep an eye on things here while we're gone. I thought it was best to keep the team small. The more people we have, the greater the risk of someone getting into trouble. When we have a better idea of what to expect, we can increase the numbers." "Do we have translators?" asked Parthenia. "Oh yeah, I was forgetting." Carina handed out the devices, which hung around the neck. Bryce asked, "Do they have translators, or are they going to think these are weird?" "They do, but the ones I've seen in vids clip to the ear. I couldn't get the printers to fabricate them. These will do." Bryce fingered his doubtfully. "What about clothes? Aren't we going to stick out?" "We're going to stick out regardless. It will look more suspicious if we try to blend in and fail spectacularly. People will wonder what we're trying to hide." "Right, so what's our story? You weren't planning on announcing we've just arrived from outer space, surely?" "I'll go over it on the way there." Shao walked into the bay, accompanied by Pamuk. The two looked comical next to each other. Pamuk dwarfed the petite pilot by 1/2 meter and was brawny while Shao was slight. Carina was not a small woman herself, but the female mercs made her feel that way sometimes. She vividly recalled the burly merc simply lifting her out of the way when she tried to prevent her from leaving their residence on Sotloza. Pamuk was picking her teeth. "Jackson not here yet?" "He's on his way," Carina replied, recalling Bryce's remark about the merc farting like a horse. She hadn't met many horses in her time, but his observation was spot on, and she was about to share a cabin with her. Perhaps Van Hasty would have been a better choice, but there were few people she felt comfortable entrusting the Bathsheba to while they were gone. Jackson arrived. "We're all here," Carina said. "Let's go and take a peek at Earth." "Hold on," said Jackson. "I've been checking the manifest. Thought you could use an update on supplies and so on." "Good idea, but I'll take a look later. I've put off this trip long enough." He continued, "I also wanted to make sure everyone was accounted for before we left. We're 2 people down." She blinked. "That isn't possible. How could we have lost 2 people over the last leg of the voyage? I mean, even if the computer hadn't recorded something happening to them, they would have been missed by now." "I've passed on the information to the medics. I guess they must still be in deep sleep, and I've a good idea who they are." "Oh," she cringed. She'd entirely forgotten the people in question too. Bryce chuckled. "It's Chertang and Cheapy, right?" "Bingo!" Their 2 pickups, one from Lakshmi Station and the other from Sotloza, had been nothing but trouble. Separately, they were bearable. Chertang was their resident expert on the Bathsheba's primary weapon, fondly nicknamed the Obliterator. In some ways, he was quite smart, though not in the area of human relationships. Cheapy was a spoiled rich girl. As Chertang's first girlfriend, she had made a split-second decision to accompany him to the ship before Carina had rained hell on her planet. Despite the fact that her decision had probably been wise, she had regretted it, loudly and at great length, ever since being transported to the Bathsheba's bridge. She mostly blamed Chertang for her predicament and, after immediately breaking up with him, had hounded him with her complaints ever since. The black dogs were seriously lacking in the compassion department. Although Cheapy's presence on the ship wasn't exactly Chertang's fault, the mercs blamed him for having an annoying ex-girlfriend. Consequently, the two had been sentenced to far longer periods of deep sleep than everyone else had to endure. And, it seemed, now the Bathsheba had reached her destination, no one had wanted to wake them. Carina said, "The medics will get on it while we're gone. Chertang and Cheapy will be up and around soon." Pamuk commented, "Awesome! Something to look forward to when we get back." Chapter 4. Darius cloaked the shuttle all the way down, making them invisible to detection. Carina had picked a small town on one of the larger continents as their first experience of human society on Earth. The town's population was around 20,000. She hoped this meant it wouldn't possess the high-tech monitoring that city authorities used for security. Yet it also wasn't a tiny backwater place where newcomers would attract immediate attention. Shao sat down in a clearing in the forest bordering the town. It was early morning. The sun was just rising, and the shuttle's scanners told them no human-sized life forms were about for kilometers around, though the vessel's descent spooked some large specimens of local wildlife. Perhaps the animals had sensed by instinct an object was approaching from above. They covered the shuttle in a camouflage blanket Carina had printed. After they had hammered in spikes to hold the blanket in place, she took a few steps back to assess the results. The cover wasn't entirely effective. It worked by deflecting the light hitting it, guiding the waves around the hidden object. At first glance, the clearing looked empty, but it was also faintly blurry or smudged. An aerial view was probably more convincing, and that was what really mattered. Satellites and passing aircraft would soon spot a starship shuttle that had appeared from nowhere, but the chances of hikers or hunters stumbling upon the shuttle were low. "It's not too bad," Bryce commented. "It'll have to do." "Let's go and meet some Earthlings," said Jackson. They shouldered their packs containing water and food supplies and set off, leaving Shao to wait for them. They were unarmed. Earth seemed generally peaceful and civilized, and the last thing they wanted to do was to get into a firefight. In the event of a conflict, they would walk away. If things got dicey, the mages could cast them out of trouble, though the object was to not attract attention. The forest was cool, humid, and quiet. Large ferns and small thorny shrubs covered the ground between the trees. Carina had mentally debated the possibility of transporting everyone closer to the town, but she didn't dare risk someone spotting them materializing out of thin air. Without a good knowledge of exactly where they would be transporting to, it was a real possibility. There was no trail nearby. Forced to push through the undergrowth, they were soon dirty, sweaty, and scratched. If their unusual clothes didn't attract attention when they reached the town, their appearance surely would. It couldn't be helped. They headed downhill, trying to seek out a watercourse. They didn't find one, but they did hit upon a path of sorts, leading through the trees and roughly in the right direction. They were nearing areas frequented by humans at last. Darius kept lagging behind, and after calling a halt for the 5th or 6th time to allow him to catch up, Carina grew irritated. She told the others to wait for her and stomped back up the path to find her brother. He was standing still, a hand resting on a tree trunk as he gazed upward at the canopy. "Darius, what are you doing? You're slowing us down. We don't want to be walking back through these woods in the dead of night." "We can transport back to the shuttle," he said simply, his attention remaining on the tree. "Well, yes, but," she spluttered, "what are you doing?" "It has feelings, you know." "The tree?" He gave her a "what do you think I meant" look, but only said, "They're faint, but I can feel them." "Right." She regarded the tree. "How does it feel?" "Calm, and he frowned. Content. I guess that's how a tree would feel. If you're done communing with the vegetation, it would be great if you could join us. Sure. That was a little mean. Sorry. It's okay, sis. They walked down the trail, Carina in front. Darius had spent more than half his life aboard a starship. This was his first experience of a natural environment in a very long time. She said over her shoulder, "If you want to do that kind of thing, talking to the trees, I mean, I don't mind, but we're in a hurry today." I wasn't talking to it. Whatever you want to call it, it's fine, but I get it, Carina. They caught up to the others and continued the trek. The woodland began to thin out. A place for eating picnics appeared ahead of them. 10 or 12 wooden tables and benches dotted about, and a children's climbing frame in the centre. No one was here, however. Then, beyond the trees, Carina spotted her first earth dwelling. Look! A house! The habitation seemed to be made of earth. Thick bricks of what looked like dried mud formed the walls of a single-story home. The roof overhung the walls, and it was alive. Living plants grew all over it. In some areas, vines dangled all the way to the ground. "Should we knock at the door?" asked Jackson. "Introduce ourselves as visitors from outer space?" "Quit kidding around," Carina said. It was mid-morning. The sun had risen above the trees and was shining through the open window shutters of the house. She couldn't spot anyone, which implied they also hadn't been spotted. "I don't understand," Parthenia said. "I thought Earth was quite technologically developed. That house looks very simply constructed, and there are no power lines running to it." Jackson replied, "You'll get many different levels of living standards on a planet. That place only represents one of them." Bryce had walked away from the group to take a look from a different angle. "Is that a well?" "No electricity or running water," Parthenia commented. "Let's head farther into town," said Carina. They took a route around the house and mostly out of sight of it. A wide dirt track ran down a slope from the forest through low scrub. Beyond it was the town proper, though it was difficult to spot at first. The roofs of all the town's habitations were similarly covered in green plants, causing them to blend into the landscape. What gave it away was the regularity of the houses and roads laid out in a grid. They saw their first people of Earth, riding bicycles or walking. "Where are the cars?" asked Parthenia. There were none. "Well, one thing's for sure," said Jackson. "We aren't gonna look weird for walking into town." "Someone's coming," said Bryce. 6 people were approaching up the track. It was not a family group. They were all adults, and their clothes were similar. All wore dark blue slacks and a white top. Carina was confused. Were they wearing a uniform? There was sufficient variation in their clothing to imply it was not, but the similarities were too great to be random chance. "What do we do?" Bryce asked. "Run? Fight?" "Speak," Carina said. "We speak to them. This is a fact-finding mission, remember? We aren't doing anything wrong. So whoever those people are, they shouldn't be a threat. We stick to the story. We're from a remote island they've probably never heard of. On vacation, just walking through the woods. I'll do the talking." When the leading woman in the party arrived within speaking distance, she called out to them in the local language. Carina's translator repeated the words in universal. "Hello. Welcome to Earth. You are under arrest." They ran. Chapter 5. Among the many conversations they'd had during the flight down, one thing they'd agreed was that if they were attacked, they were to split up and meet back at the shuttle. Hoping that others remembered the plan, Carina raced for the trees. The police, or whoever those people were, didn't have weapons out. She hoped she might reach cover before any of them got a shot off. Thudding through the long grass, shouts of "Stop! Wait!" echoed in her ears. There was also the sound of a scuffle, as if someone had been caught. Guiltily, she hoped it was Jackson or Pamuk, who were used to being manhandled. Hell, after the interminable, boring voyage, they might even enjoy it. The trees were only meters away. She might make it. "You!" a voice directly behind her called. "I order you to halt!" "Oh, sure, anything you say." She reached the shade of the canopy. She was nearly there. Once she was in the forest, she would be much harder to hit. There was an explosive sound, not a detonation, but more like a discharge with force. Something flashed across her vision, and suddenly her arms were pinned to her sides and her legs forced together. She fell face forward onto the dirt. Pounding footsteps came to a stop next to her head. "You should have listened and done what you were told," the voice complained. "This is completely unnecessary." Carina's cheek was pressed into the prickly woodland floor, and her hair had flopped over her eyes. All she could see was empty nutshells from the tree and the boots of her captor. Her limbs were tightly pinioned. She guessed her assailant had fired some kind of entrapping device. Her arms and legs felt as though they were wrapped. Perhaps what she had seen had been cords or ribbons flying around her body. "Wait here," the voice said. "I'll be back for you in a minute." Like I have a choice about it. Over the years, as Bryce and she had grown into the familiarity of a long-married couple, though technically they weren't married, he had grown sufficiently comfortable to tease her about her magehood. Whenever she screwed up, such as by programming the printer incorrectly and creating a disgusting dinner, he would say something like, "Being magic didn't make you a great cook, did it?" Or if they were doing target practice and he beat her, he would patronizingly comment, "One day you'll learn how to cast a great shot." That was the thing with non-mages. They imagined being able to cast was some kind of cure-all, a fix for each and every situation. But there were so many limitations they didn't take into account. Here on Earth, she couldn't risk casting in front of the natives. The whole point of being here was to find somewhere safe for her and her family. They couldn't reveal their secret without risking beginning the whole slavery and torture cycle again, the system that mages in distant parts of the galaxy devoted their lives to avoiding. But even if she could openly cast here on Earth, how could she possibly have drunk elixir, created the transport character in her mind, sent it out, and waited for it to take effect in the time available before she was captured? Running away was the faster, more effective, and pragmatic solution. Not that it had worked this time around. The boots returned. "Right, let's get you on your feet." A hand grasped the back of her shirt and helped her stand upright. She was staring into the face of a sandy-haired, hazel-eyed young man, roughly mid-20s. Like the other Earth men, his hair reached his shoulders and he was clean-shaven. Most of the men on the Bathsheba had given up on shaving regularly. Even Bryce had a short beard. "Where are my companions?" she asked, peering over his shoulder. She caught a glimpse of a group being led away, but only heads and shoulders were visible as they descended the slope. She looked down. Her body from her chest to her knees was encased in thin, transparent threads. "Is that a translator around your neck?" The man leaned closer. "If I free your legs, do you promise not to run? There's no point. I'll just catch you again with this." He gestured at a box on his belt. "It won't be fun to plant your face in the dirt a second time, will it? You might get hurt." He reached toward her. She flinched and pulled back. Take it easy. He brushed her cheek. Nutshells that had been embedded in her skin dropped to the ground. For a law enforcement operative, he was being excessively polite. I'm not promising anything. Let me go. You've got no right to hold me captive. I haven't done anything wrong. His eyebrows lifted. That translator is so cool. I've never seen one like that before. I'd love to take a closer look at it, but we really need to go now. I'm going to free your legs. Please don't run. I'd rather not hurt you. He took a short knife from a sheath in his belt and slit the threads enveloping her thighs. It's only a short walk to the station. You go in front where I can keep an eye on you. She might have been able to get away from him. She could have kneed him in the balls and fled into the forest. But there was no way she would be able to cut the threads around her torso. And it was a long trek back to Shao and the shuttle. She also had no idea where the captured members of her party were being taken, and she clearly stuck out as a stranger. Somehow the man knew she wasn't even from Earth. Rescuing her companions could be impossible. She stepped in the direction of the trail. Glad to see you're finally seeing sense, the man said as he followed her. After a few more steps he added, So, where are you from? What makes you think I'm not from Earth? Huh? Oh, you mean what the sergeant said. He chuckled. You don't speak English, so I guess she must be right. The situation was becoming more and more bizarre. English had to be the name of their language. So what if I don't speak English? He chuckled again. Most people speak English. Except you and your friends, that is. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but you can't deny it. You must be from off-planet. They had walked down the slope, giving her a better view of the group ahead. Darius, Parthenia, and Bryce had been caught. Pamuk and Jackson must have got away and would be heading back to the shuttle. I know what you're thinking, the man said. You're thinking we didn't catch all of you. But we will. It's only a matter of time. Where are you taking us? You'll wait in the lock-up until the magistrate arrives. He has the final decision on what to do with you. But you'll probably go to the central court in Bridgeford. After that, who knows? The capital, I suppose. But we haven't done anything wrong. You're illegal aliens from outer space of all places. I'm sorry, ma'am. I didn't write the laws. But it's my job to enforce them. How did you know we were here? Sensors in the woods, of course. They detect people. Aren't people allowed to wander around in there? Absolutely. I go up there all the time with my friends. But you triggered them. How? Like I said, you're illegal. Set off the alarms. But how? You'll have to ask a technician. I don't know how they work. How did you end up in the forest? She didn't answer. As they drew near the group in front, Parthenia looked back and her face fell. She must have been thinking her eldest sister had escaped and might help her, Darius, and Bryce out of their predicament. Carina gave her an apologetic smile. They caught up to the group and Darius also noticed her. Oh no, not you too. Don't worry, everything's going to be fine. Bryce smirked. They were escorted into town. It was an odd place. For a human habitation, it was remarkably alive. The roadways, or perhaps it was better to describe them as pathways, as no motorized vehicles ran on them, were paved. But everywhere else was green and growing. Grass surrounded each building. But it couldn't be described as lawn. The blades grew 15 centimeters tall, and other low-growing plants dotted the sward, some in flower. Shorter plants covered the roofs. Even the walls were growing surfaces, holding pockets of trailing vines. Carina asked her affable law enforcement officer, "Why is everything so green?" "What do you mean?" "There's vegetation everywhere." He frowned. Why wouldn't there be? They passed through the open doorway of an official-looking building. A sign in English hung over the portal, but naturally she couldn't read it. A woman in blue and white, sitting behind a desk, rose to her feet as they entered. The aliens! Well, isn't this something? What are those things? She asked, pointing. Wait, I understand. She marched over and lifted Carina's translator to her lips. What's your name? The device converted her words to universal. Without waiting for a reply, she laughed. I love it. She stared Carina in the face. Say something. The translator didn't repeat the utterance, and the woman's features expressed her disappointment. Does it only work one way? She asked Carina's captor. No, it works both ways. We had a little conversation, right? He turned to Carina for confirmation. Go on, say something to the sergeant. In a tone of amazement, she asked, This is your superior? When her translator conveyed her words in English, the sergeant's eyes grew hard, and she gave a cough before straightening her jacket. Put them in the cells. I've notified the magistrate. He'll be here shortly. As Carina and her companions were led away, the sergeant said mockingly, Take me to your leader. Then she burst into fits of laughter. Chapter 6. There were only 2 cells, and one was already occupied. A man in ragged clothing lay on his back on the bunk, snoring loudly. You don't mind all squeezing in together? The officer asked. Only I don't want to wake Brian up. You'll be cosy. Carina stared at him while he ushered them into the cell. He cut the threads binding their upper halves, stepped out and closed the door. She tried it, wondering if the kindness of their captors extended to not actually locking them in. It didn't open, probably magnetically sealed. You have to admit, Bryce commented, for local law enforcement they're pretty nice. Nice enough to imprison us, she muttered. Darius sat down on the bunk, which was suspended from the wall on chains. So, do we transport? Shh! She scanned the ceiling, walls and floor and bent down to look under the bunk. Though she didn't find any security devices, she remained unconvinced they weren't being monitored. Pretending to take a sip of water because she was thirsty, she swigged elixir and then sent to Darius and Parthenia. No casting. We don't know who's watching or listening, and we definitely don't want anyone to guess we need our elixir. They'll know all they have to do to control us is take it away. We use transport to escape only as a last resort. Her brother and sister signalled their understanding with their eyes, and Bryce clearly knew what had passed between them. He'd been a member of the family so long, little needed to be explained. Their incarceration almost immediately after setting foot on the planet was definitely a setback, but it wasn't necessarily a disaster. For one thing, the authorities didn't seem to know where the shuttle was. If things got dangerous, they could get back to it. Pamuk and Jackson were probably already on their way. In the meantime, the fact-finding mission could continue, though somewhat more restricted than she would have liked. She had already learned a lot. Earth natives seemed to be obsessed with natural environments, to the extent they grew plants everywhere they could squeeze them in, and their police service was remarkably friendly and casual. Nothing made much sense, but maybe things would become clearer later on. She said, "Let's wait for the magistrate the sergeant mentioned. Maybe we can find out from him or her exactly what we're supposed to have done wrong." The cells were down the corridor from the station entrance. She pressed her face against the transparent wall, angling for a look. The wall that separated the cell's area from the rest of the station was transparent too, but she couldn't see much except a couple of police officers passing to and fro. "Sit down," said Bryce. "We've been walking all morning. You must be tired." "I'm fine," Parthenia snapped. "You don't have to be on guard all the time, Carina." She ignored her. The years they'd spent on the Bathsheba might have dulled her siblings' sensitivity to the dangers mages faced, but they hadn't dulled hers. She also had a sense of desperation that wouldn't allow her to relax. If her family was to ever find a safe place to live, this was their last shot. She couldn't screw up. Activity in the reception area increased. Several officers ran to the door, and there was a struggle as someone was brought in. Shouts and exclamations resounded dully through the barrier. Darius got up and joined her. "What's that? Is something going on?" "They've caught someone else, I think." "Who?" "I can't see. I only got a glimpse." "Is it one of the mercs?" "Maybe. Whoever it is, they're putting up a hell of a fight." As they'd been talking, the sound of furniture banging about joined the noises of the altercation. Frustrated by her inadequate view, Carina pushed her face harder into the wall. Naturally, it didn't make any difference. 3 figures approached, the central person being held and dragged by the other 2. "It's Jackson." Judging by the blood trickling from his scalp, the merc had been subdued by a blow to the head. He seemed barely conscious as he was forced to walk the distance to their cell. "Stand back," one of the officers ordered. It was the man who had captured Carina. His affable demeanor had disappeared. He was pale and looked shocked. She guessed most of his prisoners were more compliant than a black dog who hadn't been in a fight for too long. As they crowded into the far side of the cell, Jackson was brought in. "He's one of your companions, right?" the officer asked. "Only he's very dangerous." With the help of his colleague, he laid Jackson down on the bunk. "Yes," Carina replied. "He's our friend." "A friend? You should know he killed someone. But he won't hurt you, I suppose." "No, he definitely won't." The officer seemed relieved. He nodded to his fellow and they left the cell. With the door closed, he continued, "The doctor is on her way to take a look at him. If he comes around and turns violent, give a shout. The cells are monitored. Someone will definitely hear you." As soon as the officers had left, Jackson swung his legs over the edge of the bunk and sat up, ruefully rubbing the back of his head. "You shot one of them?" Bryce asked. "Had to." He surreptitiously touched his prosthetic forearm, which concealed a weapon. "Didn't help in the end, obviously. That stuff that wraps around you is really effective." The officers who had finally caught him must have thought he'd thrown his gun away. Someone was probably searching for it in the woods even now. "They seemed astonished," Parthenia said. "More like appalled," said Carina. "I get the impression this is a very peaceful society." It boded well for her aims, but if she was right, Jackson was in a lot of trouble. They'd all become used to violence and death, moving on from one battle or conflict to the next. What were the repercussions somewhere these things weren't commonplace? Parthenia dabbed at his wound with the hem of her shirt. "I would help, but—" She glanced at Carina. "Don't worry," the merc growled. "I get it." "Where's—" Jackson shrugged. So Pamuk at least had escaped. The monitors the officer had mentioned couldn't be placed throughout the whole forest, or she would have been picked up. It was a shame neither she nor Shao were mages and couldn't receive sent messages. The man in the cell opposite stirred, moving his legs weakly. He turned onto his side and promptly fell off his bunk, hitting the hard floor with a thud that made it through 2 walls. While he was staggering upright, the officer returned. "Now then, Brian, take it easy. Get back into bed." He leaned nonchalantly on the wall, peering at the inmate without particular concern. "Wanna go home?" Brian slurred. "You're not ready yet. Get some more sleep." "I wanna go home." He thrust his hands into his pants pockets and rested his chest on the barrier. "The missus will be wondering where I am. Give me the shot and I'll be on my way." To be fair, Brian did appear to be sobering up by the second. "You know the law. Drunk and disorderly gets you 12 hours jail time, for your own safety as much as everyone else's. You've only been here 7 hours. You've got 5 hours to go. Come on, Matt. Give me the shot and no one will be any the wiser. I need to get home to the missus. You can calm her. If I calm her, she'll know where I am." It seemed an odd comment. Maybe comms were easily traceable here. "Have a word with Betty," Brian went on. "Go on, do a man a favour." "Oh, all right. That's what I like to hear." As the officer left to have a word with Betty, Brian noticed his fellow inmates. He stared, his bleary eyes sharpening their focus, while his jaw slowly dropped. Darius gave him a small wave. He pulled a hand out of his pocket and waved back, his mouth continuing to hang open. The sergeant, Betty, appeared. She cast a dark look at Jackson before turning to the opposite cell. "Matt tells me you're agitating to leave, Brian. You know that's against the rules. What'll happen if it gets out that I let you go before your time was up?" "But it won't get out. I won't tell a soul, I promise." You'll give me your word?" "Cross my heart and hope to die." "And you'll attend the recovery course we booked you onto?" "I'm looking forward to it. I've been wanting to turn over a new leaf for a long time." "Okay, you can have your shot. But if I see you back here again, you'll have to serve 24 hours. Do you understand?"
"Clear as crystal, Betty."
But before the sergeant could follow through with their agreement, she was called back into the reception area. Her expression was grave when she returned. A man in late middle age was walking behind her. Ignoring Brian, who watched with interest, Sergeant Betty said, "Here they are. They're all yours. Good luck with them." Gesturing at Jackson, she added, "That one's the murderer." Chapter 7. The handcuffs were made from a similar material to the cords that officers used to bring down suspects running away, except they locked. Officer Matt snapped the transparent bracelets around Carina's wrists. "You're armed now," she commented. He was carrying a handgun in a shoulder holster.
Uh-huh.
He didn't look at her as he moved to Parthenia to put on her handcuffs. Another officer, a beefy guy they hadn't seen before, had apparently been assigned to Jackson, who was hobbled as well as handcuffed. His wrists were behind his back too, while the other prisoners' hands were secured in front of their bodies. "Why are you armed?" Carina persisted. "You weren't before." Matt nodded at Jackson.
"Courtesy of your friend here, the murderer,"
he added, shaking his head. "I take it you don't see a lot of dangerous criminals." He didn't answer. His attitude toward her and her companions had changed. The friendliness was entirely gone, and he wouldn't even make eye contact. The magistrate waited outside the cell with Betty, watching the prisoners being prepared for transfer. They were to go somewhere for a preliminary hearing. No one had explained any more than that.
"What did they do?"
a voice called out. Brian's release had been delayed by the magistrate's arrival, and he remained in his cell. He was craning his neck, trying to see around Betty.
"Who are they? Did one of them kill someone?"
"Be quiet," said Betty over her shoulder, "or I'll make you wait for that shot."
I was only asking.
2 more officers waited with the magistrate and Sergeant Betty. With Jackson's minder and Matt, that made 4. Despite the fact they were transporting a murderer, the authorities still hadn't thought it necessary for their officers to outnumber the criminals. They were led from the cell in single file, Matt in front. The man assigned to Jackson walked beside him, and the remaining officers brought up the rear. They took them out of the station. A crowd had gathered. Word appeared to have gotten out that some unusual criminals had been taken into custody. The people seemed to be local townsfolk, and they gawped in the usual way, obviously enjoying the fact they had something new and interesting to gossip about. Bryce commented,
"We're famous."
"But not in a good way," said Carina. Parthenia muttered, "So much for remaining inconspicuous while we investigate Earth society." Carina had expected to see a vehicle awaiting them, but there was only the crowd, which had spilled onto the road. Bicyclists were being forced to dismount to navigate a passage.
"Break it up,"
Matt ordered.
"Nothing to see here. Move along, please."
The people ignored him. He tutted, elbowing a particularly nosy man aside as he forced his way through the throng.
"Stand back,"
Jackson's guard commanded. He had greater success. The onlookers shuffled backward a few steps, murmuring and pulling faces. "Where are we going?" Carina asked Officer Matt's back.
"Where do you think?"
he snapped without turning. "How would I know? I'm new around here, remember?"
"Bridgeford."
The crowd followed them down the street, attracting new members. "Why don't we go by car?" He threw her an annoyed look.
"We are going by car."
A cry like that of a warrior going into battle came from somewhere beyond the crowd. The people surged, pushed forward by those behind them. Some stumbled onto the prisoners. Jackson's minder yelled and shoved at them, warning them to move back.
"What's going on?"
Bryce asked. Jackson said,
"I think I recognize that."
A burly figure pelted through a gap and crashed into Matt, shoulder to shoulder, felling him like a bowling pin. Pamuk.
"I got you,"
she hollered.
"Carina, Bryce, everyone, this way."
Carina was frozen with shock. They were surrounded on every side. The officers escorting them were armed, and Jackson was hobbled. Where did Pamuk think they were going? The prisoners looked at each other uncomfortably.
"Come on!"
Pamuk rammed the nearest people.
"Get out of the way! Come on, guys!"
Carina half-heartedly followed her into the passage she was forcing, more out of sympathy and solidarity than any hope of escaping. Bryce came with her, his face a picture of second-hand embarrassment. Jackson's guard pushed past them and laid a heavy hand on Pamuk, spinning her around. She threw a fist, smacking into his jaw. He staggered and drew his weapon. The crowd tried to move out of the way, tripping and falling into each other. Carina jumped on his back, lifting her handcuffed wrists over his head and wrapping her legs around his waist. "Pamuk, run!" Hands clutched her, trying to rip her off the guard. Pamuk grabbed at the gun, tugging hard. The guard fell forward, and everyone went down. Whoever had been holding on to Carina landed on top of her. She could feel the burly guard underneath her, arching his back as he tried to get up. Where was Pamuk? She had to be on the bottom of the pile. What if the guard fired? Pamuk could be killed, and if she wasn't killed right away, she would be injured, and the mages would have to heal her in front of everyone or let her die. "We surrender!" Carina yelled, her face pressed into the guard. "Don't shoot!"
"I don't surrender!"
Pamuk's voice was muffled, but her words were clear. "Yes, you do!"
"No way! Get off me, you great lummox!"
"She doesn't mean it!"
"Yes, I do!"
The pressure on Carina's back lifted and she could breathe again. Hands fastened around her waist and hauled her to her feet. The guard managed to stand up. As he did so, Pamuk appeared to finally realize the hopelessness of the situation. She leapt up and tried to run, but Officer Matt, the person who had picked Carina up, was already reaching for his belt. Though not his gun, she was relieved to see. The crowd had scattered. Matt had a clear shot, and Carina had her first clear view of the device used to bring her down in the forest. Long liquid lines spurted from the black box, gaining solidity in the air as they went. The ends touched the fleeing Pamuk, and then the rest of the lines whirled around her, wrapping her up like a spider wrapping a fly. She toppled to the ground, but even that didn't stop her from trying to get away. She wriggled on her stomach, inching forward. The other officers had corralled Parthenia, Darius, Bryce and Jackson together and were holding them under threat of being shot. Matt rubbed a bruise on his head that must have been sustained when he fell. Jackson's guard dealt with Pamuk. He walked over to her and put a boot on her back. "Where do you think you're going?" The merc cursed so loudly and vilely, Carina was silently thankful Darius was just about a grown man. The guard fiddled at his belt and brought out a pair of handcuffs and a small knife. Slitting the threads nearest Pamuk's hands, he freed them sufficiently to draw her wrists together behind her and fasten the cuffs around them. Then he cut through the remaining threads, grasped her shirt at the neck and jerked her to her feet. "Thanks a lot," she said sarcastically. The remark was addressed at Carina. "Hey, I was the one trying to save you from being shot." "I was the one saving you guys. Why didn't you run when I told you?" "Because how in all the hells would we ever have got away?" The guard barked. "Shut it, both of you. Matt, you watch this one and her, right?" He meant Pamuk and Carina. "I'll take the murder suspect. Let's go while we still have space to move." The bystanders were regaining their confidence and approaching again. The situation was bizarre. Why were they walking along a street out in the open? In her time as a merc, and even afterward, on all the worlds she'd visited, she had never encountered such lax security. Perhaps Pamuk's idea that she might be able to free them wasn't so insane. If she'd been armed and had a vehicle, she might have done it. "So where is this car you're taking us to?" Carina asked Matt as they continued. He didn't answer, only snapped at the people in his way. Considering he was an armed police officer, they seemed surprisingly unafraid. They approached a wide open entrance. Tape had been strung across it at waist level, and the other side was empty. Matt halted and lifted the tape, telling Carina to go under it. When everyone in their group was on the other side, he warned the crowd that anyone who attempted to follow would be placed under arrest. Some of them seemed tempted nonetheless. They stepped onto an escalator that descended to a lower level. "Hey," Carina said. Matt, who was on the step below her, didn't turn around. "Hey!" She poked him with a finger. "Carina," Bryce warned. "Don't worry, he's a nice guy, I can tell." Bryce rolled his eyes. "Officer Matt, I thought you said we were going by car." "We are. That's enough questions." The escalator ended at an open tiled space. Carina got the impression it was a public space, but that the public were being excluded for the moment. They followed Matt under one of several archways and halted. They were standing on a station platform. "We're going by train?" "How else would we go?" Matt asked in return. "Here comes our car now." A railway car sped toward them, borne along a single rail. Chapter 8. "Let me get something clear," Carina said. "You don't have vehicles that run on roads on the surface?" They had the carriage to themselves. Long lines of seating ran down each side. It seemed to be a regular model for public use that the police had commandeered for transporting the prisoners. Matt sat between Carina and Pamuk. Jackson's minder sat next to him at the far end of the car, and the two remaining officers flanked Darius, Bryce, and Parthenia.
I said, Matt replied testily, that's enough questions.
But we're from off-planet, remember? How do you expect us to learn about Earth if you won't tell us anything?
Not that again. Be quiet.
Pamuk's nose was bloody from where she'd hit it on the ground. As she wiped it on her sleeve, Matt glanced at her and then fished in the top pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a tissue and dabbed at the blood. Pamuk's eyes grew wide and her mouth fell open. Matt folded the tissue in half and then dabbed some more with the clean section.
What in the stars are you doing?
The merc stuttered. Carina chuckled. There was nothing that could alarm a black dog faster than someone being nice to them.
Seeing to the welfare of my prisoners,
Matt muttered.
What do you think?
Pamuk stared at Carina as if to check she wasn't imagining things. Across the carriage, Jackson guffawed.
Quieten down,
snapped his guard. Jackson stifled his mirth. Matt put the tissue away and Pamuk relaxed. Lights in the tunnel sped past. There was little sound, only the rush of air as they travelled along. How far is it to Bridgeford? Carina asked. Matt replied,
We'll be there in a few minutes.
So, not far. Does everyone get around like this? He heaved a sigh.
Yes, everyone gets around like this. You're trying to tell me it's different where you're from? What about freight transports? Said Jackson's guard. Maybe that's what she means. The overground system. You mean going by freeway?
I don't know, Carina replied. Do I? Matt said.
Heavy loads of freight are sometimes transported on freeways. The network is a little more extensive than rail.
But what about people? Don't people travel by road?
I suppose people could go that way too, hitching a ride, but I don't know why anyone would.
Can't they travel by themselves?
How would they do that?
In cars.
But we're in a...
Not this kind of car, one that goes on roads.
I don't know what you're talking about. I think we must do things differently on Earth. Where are you from, by the way?
In some ways it was a hard question to answer. You wouldn't have heard of it.
Maybe not, but it must have a name.
She told him the name of the impoverished backwater planet where she'd grown up. 2 galactic sectors and a lifetime away.
You're right, said Matt. Never heard of it.
At the Bridgeford stop, the train ran straight through several intervening stations. The immediate area had been made off-limits to the public. The news of their arrival must have travelled ahead. A crowd pushed against a temporary barrier erected around the station exit. Do criminal suspects usually receive this kind of attention? Carina asked Matt.
The interest is all on account of your friend there.
He jerked his chin at Jackson. So there aren't many murder cases?
First local one I've heard of. I don't think there were any in my parents' time either.
Pamuk whistled.
You guys live in a fairy tale.
Is it like that all over?
People generally don't go around killing each other. Is that what it's like where you're from? What a horrible place.
Carina began to worry about what might happen to Jackson, given that his crime was so rare. Judging from the expression on the man's face, he was worrying about it too. Killing a pursuer was a reflex action for a merc. She'd lost count of how many people she had killed in her days with the Black Dogs. She had killed a fair few subsequently too. Did the crime carry a death sentence? If the worst came to the worst, she could transport Jackson to safety, regardless of whether that entailed revealing her powers. At the edge of the cordoned-off section stood 4 armed men and women, wearing uniforms the same as Matt's. He made the prisoners wait at the station exit while he talked to them. When he returned, his expression was glum. "Sad to say goodbye?" Carina asked.
"I've been seconded to the NPS, National Police Service, apparently, for an open-ended period due to my familiarity with the prisoners."
He huffed disconsolately. When his colleague, Jackson's guard, laughed, he added,
"So have you."
The man's face fell.
"You two can go back,"
Matt said to the officers guarding Bryce, Darius and Parthenia.
"This way."
He gestured for everyone to follow him. The Bridgeford police force appeared to be more respected than the one in Matt's town. The crowd stayed back as they walked to the detention centre. However, the town itself didn't seem very much different from the place they'd just left. Carina guessed they had to be in the central district, but none of the buildings were taller than 2 stories, and they were all verdant, with green roofs and trailing plants dangling down the walls. Some vehicles passing by were larger than the bicycles they'd seen in the other place, covered 3- and 4-seaters and some pulling trailers, but all were pedal-powered.
"I like it here,"
Darius commented to Carina.
"Don't you?"
"To be honest, I'm still trying to wrap my head around the place," Parthenia said. "Darius, only you could be literally wearing handcuffs and on your way to a place of incarceration to await an unknown fate, yet still see the positive side."
"I quite like it too,"
said Bryce, glancing around.
"The air's clean, and I like seeing plants everywhere. It feels like we're in the countryside, even downtown."
"I suppose it is nice," said Carina, "but it's also weird. You're forgetting the sensors in the woods. What kind of government monitors their citizens to that extent? You can't even go for a picnic without the authorities knowing about it. I wouldn't like to live like that, with 0 privacy." Matt had overheard her. He said over his shoulder,
"Those sensors are there to track kids who wander away from the picnic site. The government doesn't keep tabs on everyone's movements. Why would they?"
"Then how come you picked us up?"
"You're not chipped, and clearly not from around here."
"Is it so obvious we're off-worlders?" Matt's open, honest features creased into a confused expression.
I'm not sure."
Jackson's guard leaned close and whispered in his ear. Matt nodded and said firmly,
"No more questions."
They arrived at the detention centre. After climbing the steps into the building, they passed through 2 sets of double doors, each requiring a security check from 2 of the local police officers. 2 guards stood on the inside of the inner doors. They scanned the right hands of all the officers before allowing them and the prisoners to pass. The Bridgeford police led them downstairs to a lower section, where a woman in uniform sat at a desk. "Murder suspect first." After his guard brought him forward and removed his handcuffs and hobble, she told Jackson to empty his pockets and place everything on the table. Carina threw Parthenia and Darius a look. Their backpacks with their supplies remained at the first police station, and Jackson said he wasn't carrying anything. His guard confirmed this. "Search him again," said the woman. The guard patted him down thoroughly. "He's clean, except for the gun in his forearm." "All right, put him in cell 5. As the guard led him away, the woman looked at Carina. "Her next." Matt brought her over and took off her handcuffs. "All personal items on the table." "Uh-oh. Can I keep my water? I'm thirsty." The woman glared at her. "All personal items on the table." Carina hesitated, taking stock. She could possibly transport everyone back to the shuttle, given time, or she could create a diversion that would allow Parthenia or Darius to do it. But that would give the game away. No doubt their images had been recorded. Casting in front of all these people would give them a rep that would follow them all over the planet. "If you refuse to comply," the woman said, This officer will remove the items for you." With a heavy heart, Carina unfastened the belt holding her elixir canister, folded it and put it down. Then she pulled from her pockets the sundry bits and pieces she carried to help her locate her siblings, and also place them on the table. "That's it?" She nodded. The woman scooped everything into a bag, then got up and walked around the table. After giving Carina a cursory search, she said to Matt, "Cell 9. He led her away, taking her to the last cell in the row. "Are they splitting us up?" she asked. "They don't mess around in Bridgeford." Shit. She wouldn't even be able to communicate with her companions. Being captured on their first day on Earth was bad enough. Now things were getting worse. "We'll see you again though, right?" The friendly officer might be their only chance of escape. He grimaced. "I'm sure I'll be around." The cell door opened. The interior was tiny, just a bunk and a small cupboard. How long would she have to spend here, awaiting her fate? Matt's comment about the authorities being on the lookout for off-worlders had deeply unsettled her, though she couldn't put her finger on the reason. "In you go," said Matt, lightly touching her back. She resisted and glanced up the corridor to where Pamuk's handcuffs were being removed prior to her being processed by the woman at the desk. "Where's Jackson?" she asked. "The murderer, cell 5. But you won't be able to talk to him. You have to go inside now." His voice had a slight pleading tone to it, as if he was reluctant to force her. "Where exactly is he? I just want to know." Matt pointed at the blank door diagonally opposite. She spotted the tiny 5 above it. Memories of Sot Loza were flooding back. Her confinement on that planet hadn't been as bad as it had been for the others from the Bathsheba, but it had been bad enough. Before that, the Dark Mage on Magog had tried to trap the mages in his palace. Earlier, the Regians had captured them to turn them into living meals for their offspring. And at the very beginning of this crazy adventure she'd been living ever since rescuing Darius, the Dirksons and the Shurers had wanted to enslave her and her siblings. There was always someone trying to deprive her and the people she loved of their freedom. "No more," Matt said more firmly. "Into the cell. Now." She slammed her elbow into his stomach. Air exploded from his mouth and he doubled over. She sped down the corridor, hoping he wouldn't be able to shout for a few seconds. Racing into the admissions room, she dove for the bag of her belongings behind the desk, yelling to Darius and Parthenia, "You know what to do!" She caught a glimpse of Pamuk throwing herself on one of the officers and Bryce attacking the other. Jackson's guard seemed to have left. She got hold of the bag, but the Bridgeford officer snatched it at the same time. They wrestled, the woman yelling at her to let go. Carina managed to open it. She shoved a hand in. Her fingers closed on the smooth, hard elixir canister. She pulled it out, relinquishing the bag. The woman flew backward and landed on her backside. Instantly, she leapt up and ran at Carina, who performed a high kick, connecting with her jaw. The woman's eyes rolled up and she keeled over. Despite being handcuffed, Darius and Parthenia had managed to drink elixir and were casting. "Get away from those people you're fighting!" Carina yelled at Bryce and Pamuk. She unscrewed the lid of the canister and took a swig. "Hands up!" Matt must have got his breath back and followed her. She was writing the character in her mind. Unsure of who Parthenia and Darius were transporting, she included Bryce and Pamuk. You couldn't over-transport someone, so it didn't matter. "Put your hands up," Matt repeated, "or I'll shoot." The character was written. She sent it out. The last thing she recalled before the cast took effect was someone grabbing her arm. Chapter 9. "Not again!" Carina opened her eyes. She was back in the forest, next to the clearing where they'd concealed the shuttle. The cast had worked, and she'd escaped imprisonment. "First Cheapy, and now him," Pamuk complained. "Can't you be a bit more careful?" She turned around and came face to face with Matt, who had the look of someone suffering a large and unwelcome surprise. Damn, her transport had carried him along with her. "Sorry about this."
What the?
Pale and sweaty, he turned a circle, gaping.
Where am I?
She checked everyone else had made it before reassuring him. "Don't worry, I didn't bring you far. You can probably walk home from here."
No, he can't,
said Bryce.
Parthenia, could you unlock me?
He was still wearing handcuffs. Parthenia replied, "In a minute, I have to do my own."
"I'll do all of us,"
said Darius. "Why not?" Carina asked Bryce. "We're back in the
think."
Matt knew exactly what they'd done. Or if not exactly, he knew they'd done something to move themselves and him kilometers across the landscape. The other officers back at Bridgeford Detention Centre had only seen them disappear. That was bad, though a better alternative to being locked up. But Officer Matt knew more. Too much, in fact. Oh yeah. He seemed to be coming to the same understanding, for he was beginning to slowly edge away from the group. "You should hang around here for a while," Carina said. 3 sets of handcuffs opened and fell to the ground. He seemed to suddenly recall he had a gun. He lifted it and pointed it at her, then pointed it at each of them in turn, all the while backing up toward the trees. "Stay here," Carina said. "I promise no one's going to hurt." He ran. Pamuk raced after him, only a few steps behind, her boots thumping in the soft leaf litter, and Bryce followed. All 3 disappeared under the overhanging branches. Loud rustling and the sound of twigs breaking came from under the canopy, and flashes lit up the shadows as Matt fired. "He won't get away," Parthenia remarked. "No," Carina agreed. A corner of the camouflage sheeting over the shuttle lifted and Shao emerged. "I thought I heard talking. I wasn't expecting you back so soon. How did it go?" "Terribly," Parthenia replied. Darius said,
"It only took us a couple of hours to reveal our abilities."
"I think that must be a record," said Shao. "Where are the others?" "Long story," Carina said. "Pamuk and Bryce will be back soon with a visitor. Meanwhile, I have to retrieve Jackson." She swigged elixir. "Where from?" "Jail." She closed her eyes. "Not his first time, I bet." "Probably." "Good luck," said Parthenia. Darius added, "Be careful." She was within the confined space of Jackson's cell. The merc lay on his bunk, hands behind his head.
"What took you so long?"
"I've only been gone 5 minutes. Stars."
"Where did you go?"
"Back to the..." Her lips snapped shut and she cast a glance around the cell. "Get ready." Jackson swung his legs over the edge of the bunk and got to his feet. The cell door opened. The woman who had checked Jackson and her into detention, plus another Bridgeford police officer, stood in the entrance. Damn. As she'd suspected, the cell was being monitored. She lifted her canister to her lips. "Cover me," she told Jackson from the corner of her mouth. He pushed up his shirt sleeve. The female officer gasped, "What are you doing? Put that down! How did you do that? Shoot! Shoot the..." Carina was in the forest again, her merc friend by her side.
"Hey, Jackson,"
said Darius.
"Hey, kid."
He rolled his shoulders and surveyed his surroundings.
"What happened to Pamuk and Bryce? Didn't they make it back?"
"They're fine," Carina replied. "They're around here somewhere." The undergrowth parted, and Pamuk and Bryce appeared from amongst the foliage, Matt suspended between them. In the scuffle to apprehend him, he'd sustained a cut lip, and the skin around one of his eyes was swelling and turning purple. Carina winced. The man hadn't done anything to hurt anyone. He'd just been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or rather, grabbed the wrong person at the wrong time. Couldn't you two be more gentle? She chided.
Did you want us to capture him or not?
Bryce retorted. Jackson squinted at the police officer.
Why did you bring him along?
I didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident.
You mean like Cheapy?
Jackson shared a look with Pamuk. Yes, Carina replied between her teeth. Like Cheapy. Cuff him, Jackson, said Pamuk. She held Matt's gun in her other hand. As she passed the man over, she tucked it into the back of her pants. What now? Well, said Parthenia, as our first foray into Earth society was pretty much a disaster, maybe we should return to the Bathsheba and rethink our strategy. Carina sighed. First of all, let's not discuss our business in front of the prisoner.
I didn't hear anything, said Matt. Nothing at all. And I promise, if you let me go, I won't remember anything about any of this.
So how are you going to explain disappearing along with the rest of us? When you're asked how you managed to arrive in this forest from nowhere, what are you going to say?
I'll tell them I don't remember. I could say I hit my head.
He gestured at his swollen eye. And your lip happened to walk into a fist too? No one's going to believe you. I'm sorry, but you're sticking with us, at least until we figure out what to do with you. He hung his head.
Don't worry,
said Darius.
You won't come to any harm. We're nice people. Pamuk isn't,
Jackson said. She shoved his shoulder. He continued,
and neither are Rees or Van Hasty, come to think of it. And Carter and Blake are absolute ass.
That's enough of a rundown on the black dogs, Carina interrupted. Jackson, you stay with the prisoner. Everyone else, over here. After they'd walked some distance away, she went on, I'm inclined to agree with Parthenia. We need to leave for a while and debrief before thinking up a new way forward. Clearly, just walking into town isn't going to work. We stick out too much.
And we don't have any idea what we're doing,
said Darius. There is that too. But we can't take the prisoner with us, said Pamuk.
He's seen what you guys do. He's already a liability, and if we take him back to the ship, he'll see everything. We'll never be able to let him go. It might be better and kinder to get rid of him now. It's either that or keep him in the brig forever.
Carina sucked in a breath. I'm fairly confident Officer Matt won't think it's better and kinder to kill him now.
We can't kill him, Darius exclaimed. That would be terrible. It's only a suggestion, said Pamuk.
Parthenia said, We've come a long way over many years and we aren't leaving any time soon. Who knows what the future holds? It's still early days. We can't leave the prisoner behind, so we have to take him with us. After that, we'll have to see how things pan out. But I agree, we can't kill him. There's been enough death on our journey. Let's not sully our endeavour with more of it. You're right, Carina said, admiration for her sister swelling in her chest. You're absolutely right. Okay, the prisoner comes with us.
If his mind was blown by our casting, Darius said, I wonder what he'll make of the Bathsheba.
Chapter 10. Carina wasn't sure exactly what Officer Matt made of the colony ship as he stepped down from the shuttle, but it wasn't good. She was behind him. All she could see was his back, but it was clear from the way his chest expanded and contracted rapidly. He was going through something. She called out to Bryce, who was walking in front. Check the prisoner! He turned just in time to catch Matt as he collapsed. Bryce supported him, holding him under the arms as his head lolled against his shoulder, and then gently eased him down onto the deck. Matt was out cold. She guessed travelling to a starship must have been too much of a shock. The mission members crowded around the prone figure.
I'll heal him,
said Darius. No, get a medic, just in case it's serious. He might have something wrong with him. If he has, we need to know what it is.
It's not my fault, said Pamuk defensively. I didn't hit him that hard.
Jackson tutted.
Always the victim blaming.
I'll com sickbay, said Shao. By the time the medics arrived, Matt was already coming around. After a quick assessment, they decided he'd probably only fainted, but they would take him in for 24 hours for observation. Pamuk and Jackson went with them to arrange security. Fern and Oriana appeared.
We heard you were back,
Fern said.
How did it go?
Oriana added. We thought you would be gone for days. I take it there was a huge disaster due to the fact we weren't with you. There was somewhat of a disaster, Parthenia replied, but it would have been the same whether you were with us or not.
Still, said Fern, it's our turn next, right, Carina?
Nothing's been decided yet.
We've only just got off the shuttle for Star's sake.
We need to think things through. Though it had been years since his death, she missed Cadwallader more than ever. He would have had a plan B, or at the very least they could have bounced ideas off each other. She also missed Jace and his gentle, steady good sense and kindness. Oriana whined.
Are you going to tell us what happened or not? You can't leave us hanging.
I'm exhausted, Parthenia said. If you want my side of the story, you'll have to wait for it. I'm going to lie down for a while.
I'll tell you, said Darius. But first I want something to eat. You can talk and eat, Fern said. Come on.
Carina watched the 4 siblings walk out of the bay. Bryce wrapped an arm around her, and she sighed as she rested her head on his shoulder. Parthenia's right. That was a huge disaster. What made me think we could just appear on Earth and everything would be fine? That they would accept mages, leave us alone, and we could all live happily ever after?
I don't think you ever thought that, did you? We all knew it wouldn't be plain sailing. What we didn't know was what the problems might be.
I guess you're right. Let's go and eat, preferably somewhere far away from Fern and Oriana and their interrogation. They took an elevator to Deck 7, printed some simple food in a small galley, and went into the Twilight Dome. Luckily, it was empty, possibly because all that could be seen through the transparent overhead was the dusty, rocky, grey, barren surface of Earth's moon. Scan data showed there had once been research stations beneath the surface, but all had been abandoned. No humans lived there now who could spot the vast starship in geostationary orbit on its far side. They sat and began to eat. Carina picked at her noodles and vegetables. After a few moments, Bryce said, "Spit it out." "Huh?" She paused, her fork poised halfway to her mouth.
"Whatever it is that's bothering you."
She put the fork down. "Isn't it obvious? How are we ever going to make a success of this? The people on Earth are a bunch of weirdos. They grow plants in every available crevice, their police aren't usually armed, and they get around in underground tunnels. I noticed something else too. There were no fields for crops or for farm animals. How the heck do they eat?"
"We only saw a small area. Maybe there weren't any farms around there. And we only saw a couple of towns in one country. Earth won't be the same all over. No planet is like that. You should know. You've seen enough of them."
"Do you think we should try another country?"
"It wouldn't hurt."
"But the news of what we did in that detention centre will be all around the globe by now. They must have vids of us. There were cameras everywhere. Jackson even had one in his cell. So our faces will be known, as well as our ability to disappear and reappear at will. Wherever we set foot will be noticed, and then someone will be along to arrest us."
"Maybe we could go somewhere very remote, where there isn't much tech."
The place where she'd grown up had been similar to what Bryce described. It had been very poor. No one could afford expensive technology, and few people could afford any tech at all. Nine hadn't had anything to connect her with the outside world. She relied on the customers for news about what was going on, though Carina suspected her grandmother must also have scent with other mages. She wouldn't have told Carina about it while she was too young to keep a secret. In fact, that might have been how she knew Bar had died, not because she had a feeling.
Your food's getting cold.
I'm not hungry. She put the plate down. Maybe you're right. Maybe we could go somewhere far from civilization, but what would be the point? The reason we're here is to find a place where mages can live in the open, where we're accepted for who we are, and no one tries to exploit us. If we have to hide away in the wilds, I'm back to square one. That's how I grew up. It was a better experience than my siblings, at least until Nine died, but it wasn't much of a life. I don't want to live in fear anymore. Is that too much to ask?
No, it isn't. But I think you're being too pessimistic. So our first try didn't work out. So what? We can try again. We have a whole planet with billions of people, and we've only just arrived. If you thought everything would be easy, you were expecting a lot. It might take years for humans on Earth to understand your family and to learn how to deal with them fairly.
Ugh, it's already taken us years to get here. Yet he was right. She was being impatient.
Have you thought about other mages?
Others? On Earth?
The documents you found on Ostalon confirmed the old stories that mages came from Earth. Even if they all left, the mutation might have reappeared. There might be mages down there, only they don't know what they are.
They didn't all leave. The documents say some chose to remain and go into hiding. With Nala's help over the long years of the voyage, she had translated everything in the ancient papers. Naturally, there was no way to check whether the translation was accurate, but their version made sense.
There you go. If the ones who stayed behind passed down their lore the same as the colonizers, there are mages on Earth now who could help you.
That's a big if. It would have been safer to give up practicing their abilities.
The mages who left didn't.
But they had new worlds all to themselves for decades, perhaps centuries, before ordinary humans caught up to them. He was giving her a steady stare. All right, she conceded. I guess I am being too negative. I hate to think of those poor people living there for millennia, frightened of their powers being revealed and suffering the same hatred and persecution as their ancestors. And it would mean that my quest is hopeless, that Earth isn't a safe haven and never will be.
We've barely arrived, Carina. Stop overthinking things. We can try again somewhere else. Only we'd better take Fern and Oriana this time, or we'll never hear the end of it.
He continued to eat, and she watched him, thankful for his presence in her life. Then something about him distracted her. After a few moments, he noticed.
What's wrong? What are you looking at?
He lifted a hand to the spot above his left ear that was her focus. Oh, nothing. Have you finished? She offered to take his plate.
Have I got a cut there?
He pressed his fingers against his scalp.
I can't feel anything.
I forgot to ask you, how did you take down Matt?
Pamuk threw a stone to make the undergrowth rustle, and when he fired at it, I tackled him from behind. Then Pamuk took over. You know how things went after that. But you're changing the subject. What's so interesting about my hair?
You're going grey. Did you know?
No, I didn't.
A brief look of concern flitted over his features, but then he shrugged.
It's only to be expected, I suppose, after living with you all these years.
She chuckled and playfully punched his arm. I'm to blame, huh? Then she grew sombre and continued in a softer tone. Do you have any regrets? Answer honestly. He had left his family behind to be with her, abandoning them, with a note to say he was safe, but he had something he had to do. That would have been the last his parents and siblings had heard from him, and with the effects of time dilation, all of them would be long dead.
I made my choice. You can't live with a choice like that while holding on to regrets. I would have driven myself crazy, and it was the right choice.
Thanks. I needed to hear that.
No problem. It's the truth. Hey, we're forgetting something. We don't need to rely on all those quadrillions of bits of data about Earth anymore. We have our own shipboard source of intel now.
Of course, Officer Matt. Chapter 11. Matt was looking better when Carina went to see him a few hours later. He was sitting up in bed and Ava was fussing over him, adjusting his pillow and pouring water into a cup. The Marchonish woman hadn't spent much time out of deep sleep on the long voyage. She had said she didn't want her little girl to spend most of her childhood living on a starship, but the time she had spent awake, she'd asked to be trained as a medic, to give her a source of income when they reached Earth. On Marchon, women had been expected to stay at home and not undertake paid employment, which would bring great shame on their families. Carina had a soft spot for Ava, who had lived with her siblings on Sotloza and, to an extent, been a mother figure while Carina could not. Now her daughter was 4 years old, and Ava had her hands full with working and looking after her. Consequently, and partly also due to the mages spending more time out of stasis, the two families had drifted apart, though Carina still felt warmly toward her. She remained embarrassed that she'd named her daughter Carina, however. "How's our patient?" she asked. "He's doing very well. All his vitals are normal. It's most likely he suffered a bout of low blood pressure as he disembarked the shuttle. It isn't uncommon in people not used to space travel." The colour had come back to Matt's cheeks, and he definitely looked perkier. One of his wrists was handcuffed to the bed frame. Carina asked, "Is he well enough for a chat?" "Absolutely. I wouldn't have a problem with him being discharged today, but Dr. Asher is being cautious as usual. She's given him one of your translators." Matt's attention was focused on Ava until she left the room. When he turned to Carina and Bryce, caution overshadowed his features.
"What do you want?"
Carina perched on the side of his bed. "We aren't any happier about this situation than you. I didn't intend to take you with me when I transported to the forest. It was an accident, but now you're here, we're all going to have to make the best of it."
"And what does making the best of it mean exactly?"
"We're not sure yet. As my brother was telling you, we aren't bad people. No one here will hurt you, or at least not unless you force them. You should know most of the people on this ship are trained mercenaries, and they haven't had a fight in a very long time."
"You're keeping me here against my will. If that isn't hurting me, I don't know what is."
"Believe me, you don't want to find out. Like I said, we haven't come to a decision about what to do with you, but in the meantime, perhaps you can help us."
"Why would I do that?"
"Call it doing us a favor."
"I don't owe you anything."
"No, but—" She appealed to Bryce with her eyes. He sat on the other side of the bed.
"Look, friend, you're at a big disadvantage. Carina is trying to be nice because she feels guilty about dragging you into this. I wouldn't call threatening me with mercenaries being nice, but the fact is you have no way of contacting anyone. All anyone on Earth knows is that you mysteriously disappeared along with a bunch of prisoners. They probably think you're in on our game. Otherwise, why would you disappear too? If you never go back, no one will ever be any the wiser about what happened to you. So it's in your interest to do whatever we say, isn't it? That way, we might be inclined to feel kindly toward you."
Matt shifted uncomfortably, his gaze travelling between them.
What do you want me to help you with?
We need to know about Earth, Carina said.
Earth?
He laughed.
Odd question. It's a big place. Could you whittle that down a bit?
As she tried to decide what would be most useful to know, he went on,
Maybe if you told me who you are and what you're trying to do, it would help.
Where to start? She wasn't sure it was safe to tell him anything.
How did you move me from Bridgeford to the forest? I thought you must have drugged me somehow, but you said it happened like I experienced it, disappearing in one place and a second later appearing in another. I've seen it plenty of times on shows, but that's just a trick. You're saying it really happened?
She didn't answer. Mage powers were the last thing she wanted him to know about.
Can all aliens do that?
Aliens? We're not aliens. We're human, like you.
But we're on a starship, right? A very big one from what I can tell. That smaller ship we were on brought us here. Only aliens travel on starships.
That's not true, said Bryce.
Humans invented space travel millennia ago. We travel on starships all the time.
Matt's eyes lit up.
I get it now. You're members of that cult. What's it called? The Exodus Testifiers. You did drug me. All of this is made up.
We're what?
Exodus Testifiers. Don't try to deny it. I'll give you credit, though. You had me fooled for a while there.
Bryce said,
What the hell are you talking about? If you let me go now, I'll say you treated me well. You'll get off with a light sentence, maybe just a few months in a psychiatric hospital.
Matt, Carina said, what's an Exodus testifier? He laughed again.
Nice. Keep it up. This is hilarious. Where did you get the money for all this? All those props and special effects must have cost a fortune. And are the people members of the cult too, or did you pay actors?
We haven't paid anyone anything. This is all real.
No, it isn't. I understand you enjoy pretending, but it's time for the play acting to stop. Kidnapping a police officer is a serious crime, and you can add assault to that charge.
He prodded his swollen eye.
You need to release me, and you need to do it now, before you get into even more trouble.
He was so earnest, for a brief moment Carina had the weirdest sense that perhaps he was right. Could she be living in an illusion? Could her life up until now be the imaginings of a sick mind? Then she snapped back to reality. Everything that's happened to you is exactly as it seemed. You were transported to the forest. You travelled on a space shuttle, and you are aboard a starship. Her name is the Bathsheba, and she used to be a colony ship. We acquired her in deep space, galactic sectors away from here, and we've travelled for decades in stasis to come to Earth. Matt shook his head in wonder.
It's marvellous how deeply you believe all that bullshit, despite all the evidence to the contrary. Tell me, where are you from, and what did you used to do, before you got sucked in, I mean?
Carina locked gazes with Bryce. How could they convince Officer Matt of the truth?
Maybe we should call Asher,
Bryce said. Yeah, good idea. The doctor could assess Matt's mental state. He could be experiencing a psychotic break. The shock of all that had happened to him might have placed too much stress on his mind, and this was his way of explaining everything. Dr. Asher will check you over again, she said. She won't be long.
No more checks. You must let me go, now.
He rattled his handcuff on the metal bed frame.
People will be looking for me, and it won't be long before they trace my chip. You don't stand a chance. Save yourselves, and give yourselves up.
Carina rose to her feet. There was no point in arguing with him. He was completely convinced he was right. As she and Bryce walked to the door, Matt shouted after them, You won't get away with this. Things are going to go very badly for you if you don't release me immediately. When they were outside, Bryce went into Asher's office while Carina calmed Nala. Hi, Carina, she replied. I heard you were back. How did it go? Not great, but I have another problem I'd like your help with. You've been looking at the information we have on Earth, right? Did you notice anything about Exodus testifiers? What a strange name. No, I don't think so. I'm sure I would remember if I did. Could you look it up? Find out everything you can about them. Happy to, but why? Is it something to do with mages? Nothing like that. I accidentally kidnapped a police officer, and he thinks that's what we are, Exodus testifiers. And unless we can convince him otherwise, I don't think he's going to tell us anything useful about Earth. Hold on. Rewind. You accidentally kidnapped a police officer? Don't start. Pamuk gave me enough grief already, all the way back on the shuttle. Chapter 12. Though the translations of the Mage documents were all on the ship's database and readily accessible via any interface, Carina sometimes liked to handle the ancient papers themselves. There was a sense of connectedness and deep nostalgia to be had from touching the sheets created by her ancestors thousands of years ago. And she had worked so hard and so much had been sacrificed to attain them. Some people had sacrificed their lives. The documents were precious, priceless in fact. What value could be placed on something so unique? She had taken them from the safe and brought them to the cabin she shared with Bryce. In the early days of the journey, a techie had encased the brittle, aged papers in a transparent material to preserve them, and now they slid easily between her fingers. One by one, she placed them on the bed, spreading them out. The same handwriting had been used on all of them, though the author hadn't signed their name. Similarly, no signature gave away the identity of the artist who had created the sketches of the Mage's mountain home, their first attempt at a sanctuary for their kind. Perhaps the writer and artist had been the same person. Had he or she ever imagined that their creations would still exist thousands of years later and be the remaining source of written lore of mages? The door chimed. Nala had come to see her. Carina invited her sister in. "You got those old papers out again?" Nala asked, eyeing the unconventional bedspread. "Didn't we squeeze every last drop of knowledge out of them?" "I reckon we did, but I still like to look at them. Can I get you a drink?" Nala shook her head. "Don't let me stop you, though." She sat at the table. "I like coming here. Fern and Oriana did a wonderful job with your room." The twins had excelled as interior decorators during the voyage, expanding on their first vocation as fashion designers. They had printed wall hangings and paintings and created matching textiles for the cabin. Carina had allowed them free rein as an indulgence, which had resulted in a daring mix of colours and patterns. But the effect had grown on her over time. "You should let them do yours." Carina sat opposite her sister. Nala shuddered. "Too risky. It worked with you, but who knows what they might come up with for me? And then I would have to pretend I liked it, or they would be offended. Besides, there's no point now. We won't be living here much longer." "I'm not too sure about that. From what happened on our first try, I think it's going to be hard to do what we want." I bumped into Parthenia on my way over. She told me a little of what happened. At least no one was hurt. That's about the best that can be said. It's nice to see you, but I take it this is more than a social visit. Nala's preference for research over company was well known. "Are you here to tell me what you found out about the Exodus testifiers? You know me too well." She opened the table's interface and navigated to a personal file. After opening it, she turned the display to face Carina. "That was quite the rabbit hole you sent me down. Fascinating stuff. And it throws a whole new light on human civilization on Earth. Read the top entry. Exodus testifiers, conspiracy theorists or mentally ill. John Markham, name changed for anonymity, is an unprepossessing man. Pass him in the street and you wouldn't look twice. Grey-haired, mid-50s and well into middle-aged spread. He's even wearing the trademark cardigan and slacks typical of his generation when he allows me into his home. I ask him if he's married, but Markham is single, perhaps unsurprisingly. It would take a special kind of person to tolerate living with someone so deep into their obsession. Most of us have a hobby or pastime. We all need something fun and interesting to do for leisure, whether it be sports, outdoor pursuits, crafts, or more esoteric activities. But few take things to the level John has, and he isn't alone. It's estimated there are more than 10,000 Exodus testifiers spread across the globe, and, what's more, their numbers are growing. I first came across John's writings on an ancient history forum. That's one of my interests. I'd heard of Exodus testifiers, but I'd never encountered one in the flesh, so to speak. Knowing it wouldn't be long before his words were gone, I copied everything he wrote. Inevitably, the mods banned him about an hour later. But by then I had a treasure trove of his thoughts, beliefs, and, some might say, ravings. I read them avidly, and my eyes were opened to this bizarre cult. I had to know more. Perhaps I was developing an obsession of my own. John must have known his opportunity to voice his views to the general public would be brief, because he'd given his contact details in one of his posts. No sooner had I found him than a meeting was set up. He seemed eager to introduce a new potential disciple to the fellowship. His home is testimony to his beliefs. Images of starships adorn every centimetre of the living room wall. Models of the vessels sit on every available surface. He invites me to take a seat, moving aside a pile of odd packages. When I ask what they are, his answer surprises me, even though I thought I knew what I was getting into. Rations, he says with a grin. He picks one up. Freeze-dried curry. Add water and heat it up, after steaming your rice, of course, and bingo, a healthy meal. He picks up another package. Ice cream. He pulls a face. That one isn't so nice. But if you were in a survival situation, it would be very welcome, I'm sure. Survival situation? I ask. Is that what this is about? That's only a small part of it. Survival just happens to be my particular interest. I see. I'm new to this. Would you be able to sum up the core Exodus testifier's beliefs in a sentence or two? I reach into my pocket for my interface. Do you mind if I record our meeting, for me to listen to later, in case I forget anything? His expression turns sharp and serious. You aren't a journalist, are you? No, just an interested citizen. Only the media has a tendency to make fun of us. Testifying is a serious pursuit. We have plenty of evidence to back up our claims, but academics are too frightened of upsetting the status quo to pay any attention to it. The minute anyone knows you're a testifier, everything you say is ignored and dismissed. I won't make a recording if you don't want me to. I slip the interface back into my pocket. He relaxes. 1 or 2 sentences? That's hard. But if I had to summarize, I'd say we basically believe that, for a period of 2,000 or 3,000 years, humans regularly left Earth in order to colonize other worlds. Let's be clear, you aren't talking about Mars, Venus, or other planets in the solar system. You mean planets light years away. I decide to humor him. I get the impression that the slightest questioning of his beliefs will make him shut up tighter than a clam. I gesture at the many pictures and models of space-going vessels surrounding us. In ships like these, Carina's jaw dropped. She lifted her gaze to Nala, who was watching her with amusement. What did I just read? Nala chuckled. There's more, if you're interested, lots more. He doesn't think people ever left Earth? Not just the writer, most of the population. Exodus testifiers are the exceptions. But how is that possible? It doesn't make any sense. Even if the people on Earth gave up on space exploration, they can't have forgotten about it. There has to be plenty of evidence to show what happened in the past. Apparently not. And thinking about it from a data storage perspective, it isn't so strange. Computer systems change over time. What was accessible a few centuries ago could be completely corrupted or irretrievable now. Data doesn't persist in the same way as those Mage documents on your bed. And reporting styles change too. Present-day archaeologists might misinterpret an ancient media report about a colony ship's departure as fiction rather than fact. But what about shipyards? They're huge. There has to be something left of them. Most starships are built in space, remember? They would have fallen to Earth, probably crashing into an ocean. There might be something left of component manufacturing plants, but an excavation wouldn't necessarily reveal the exact purpose of the discovered artifacts. That would be open to interpretation, and people tend to explain evidence in the context of their own culture and perspective. The enormity of the misunderstanding was hard to swallow, but one thing was clear. Officer Matt genuinely thought they were crazy cultists, living out a fantasy. She didn't know how to persuade him that he and most of the rest of humanity was wrong. Whatever they showed him, he would believe it was an illusion. If they took him on a tour of the ship, he would think it was an impressive set. If they showed him the view from the Twilight Dome, he would say it was a vid. So, said Carina, if we were to go to Earth and announce that we were space travellers from another galactic sector, the descendants of colonizers who left millennia ago, no one would believe us? Not only that, there's a good chance you would be locked up for your own good. As the article implies, Exodus testifiers are often believed to be mentally unwell. But what if we showed them the Bathsheba? No one could deny we were telling the truth then. Right, but if you did that, how long do you think you could hold on to her? The arrival of an actual starship from outer space would blow apart the current understanding of humankind's history. My impression so far of Earth societies is that they're generally friendly, non-violent and free. But that doesn't mean someone won't decide the shockwave of the revelation would be dangerously destabilizing and seek to remove the evidence from scrutiny. And let's not forget about all the Bathsheba's tech and weaponry. Less well-meaning individuals would be very keen to get their hands on them. Carina rubbed her temples. We could hold them off, but not forever. And announcing their presence in such a loud fashion was the last thing she wanted. Thanks for doing the research. The results have been illuminating to say the least. It wasn't difficult, and it was fun. I'm sorry if I created more problems for you. Nala rose to her feet. It's better I'm aware of them now than find out the hard way. Let me know if there's anything else I can help you with. As Nala left, Carina had a brief vision of a small, frightened girl, recently released from her dark mage elder brother's control, traumatized from being trapped in a shuttle cabin with Stevenson's body. She had come a long way. She was now a confident young woman, and the smartest person on the ship. She deserved a good, happy, fulfilling life. They all did. But the chances of achieving it were looking increasingly remote. Carina returned to the Mage documents spread out over her bed. How to turn what she knew into a successful outcome. How could they integrate into Earth society safely and live openly without hiding fundamental aspects of themselves? Her gaze alighted on the drawings depicting the Mage's mountain hideaway. It had to be ruins by now, if any of it remained at all. It was doubtful she would learn anything useful there, yet she had a hankering to visit anyway, if only to walk in the places her ancestors had trodden, imbibing their spirit. But no location was given, understandably, considering the dangers they'd faced. She tilted her head. Surrounding the stone-walled edifice was the mountain landscape. The lines of the ridges stood out clearly against the sky. Buildings, towns, and cities rose and fell, constructed by humans and destroyed by nature. But mountains didn't change for tens of thousands of years, or at least not significantly. She calmed Nala. There's something else I'd like you to do. Chapter 13. Carina pulled the copy of the Mage document from her bag, studied it, and then scanned the view. Thick grey cloud cloaked the sky, obscuring the mountain peaks. Snow glinted on the highest points. Oriana peered over her shoulder. This is it. It has to be. Look, Fern, what do you think? Her twin, without asking, took the sheet from Carina's hands and frowned over it before handing it back. His eyes narrowed as his gaze swept the view. Maybe, but I wouldn't get your hopes up. After all this time, there won't be anything left. That isn't the point, Oriana countered. That's right, isn't it, Carina? Carina shivered, turned up the collar of her coat and pulled her hat lower. She was already regretting bringing her brother and sister along, but without a good excuse she hadn't been able to say no. The twins were intense and had only grown more so during the voyage. Just being around them was tiring. In truth, she didn't know how to answer the question. She had no good reason for being here, except that she had to do something. Parthenia, in the interests of having a mage aboard the ship, had stayed behind this time. So had Pamuk, Jackson and Bryce. They were known to the Earth authorities, as was she, but this whole thing was her idea. It was her responsibility to make it work. Though the rest of the Black Dogs and the Marchonish women were gagging to visit Earth, she had decided to limit the new away team to Darius, herself, the twins and Shao. They needed Darius to cloak the shuttle, but he was staying with it, along with Shao. Until they knew more about the local systems, Earth wasn't safe for anyone from the Bathsheba. Matt had said they were not chipped. Any one of them could be quickly spotted as an alien and picked up. On the other hand, they were on an entirely different continent, so who knew what might happen? "Carina," Oriana repeated. "Did you hear me?" "I heard you. You're right. I don't expect to find the hideaway." However, the mountains in the place Nala had suggested did match the sketches made by a mage thousands of years ago. The habitation the mages built had sat in a high pass, indicated on the drawings but obscured from view when looking from below. "I think there's a path over there." Shao had landed the shuttle as close to the site as possible, but in the rocky landscape they still had many kilometers to travel. It was exactly as the mages had intended. They'd deliberately made their home difficult to reach in order to discourage unwanted visitors. Any non-mages who made it there were turned away, and sometimes they died in the wilderness. That had been the start of the enmity toward mages, the beginning of the motivation behind their exodus. Exodus testifiers. Did they believe in mages too? Or did they only know about ordinary humans' attempts at galactic colonization? Would it be worth talking to a testifier? "We should transport up there," said Fern. They were near the narrow gap in the undergrowth Carina had spotted from below. "Is that wise?" Oriana asked. If you didn't know exactly where you were going, transport was a little risky. One time Carina had ended up waist deep in a swamp. "There's nothing between us and our destination except trees," Fern replied. What could possibly go wrong?
Don't say that, Oriana warned. That's inviting trouble.
We could leapfrog from here to that slope over there. That'll halve the distance we have to travel.
I don't suppose it'll hurt, said Carina. The less time they spent trekking, the better, for several reasons. She pointed out a particularly tall pine.
I'll take us all there.
She sipped elixir, cast, and then opened her eyes, instantly tumbling over and landing on her side in thick leaf litter. Oriana had done the same. Fern laughed.
You two are hilarious. Didn't you realize the ground would be at an angle?
Carina got to her feet, brushing dead pine needles from her clothes.
Next time you're transporting us.
She helped her sister up. It was darker among the tall overshadowing trees, and the air was colder. Her ears had popped as she arrived.
Smart move, Oriana grumbled. Now we can't see where to go. Which way is the pass? It would have been the same if we'd walked here, Fern retorted. Only we would be a lot more tired.
With the sun obscured by a blanket of cloud, it was hard to tell directions. But one thing Carina did know, and that was they had to go up. This way. She headed up the slope, weaving through the trees. They didn't grow thickly at this altitude, and if her guess was correct, they would soon thin out before disappearing altogether. Her years aboard a starship were taking their toll. She toiled upward, puffing and panting, hearing the gasping breaths of Fern and Oriana behind her. Soon she was sweating despite the cold.
Maybe, Oriana said, we should take a chance and...
Forget it, Carina said. We could transport to the edge of a precipice and fall off,
and perform the fastest transport ever before we hit the bottom.
As Carina had predicted, the trees soon disappeared. They scrambled over rocks and slipped on shale as they drove themselves steadily upward.
We could do lots of small jumps,
Oriana called out. Her voice sounded distant. Carina halted and turned. Her sister stood about 30 meters down the slope, leaning on a boulder.
Fern yelled, We would use up all our elixir, silly. Come on, it can't be far now.
I don't suppose someone could carry me. They ignored her in the way only siblings well used to, and tired of, their brothers' or sisters' shenanigans could. In a few moments the sound of Oriana's dogged footsteps came from behind as she crunched her way over the stones. Somehow she managed to convey her annoyance in every step. When they reached the pass, it appeared suddenly. 1 minute they were working their way up yet another steep rise, one of seemingly countless others, and the next flat ground stretched out before them. The area separated 2 steep mountain sides and was strewn with loose rock. In the gap a sliver of blue sky appeared from the lowest stretch of the pass. Everywhere else was grey, misty and chill.
We found it, Oriana breathed. It has to be it.
Carina pulled the document from her backpack. Next to the image showing the view of the mage's hideaway from afar was a close-up version. No, it's wrong. We've come the wrong way. Damn.
Let me look.
She handed the sheet to Fern and sat on the cold ground, exhausted. They were clearly in the wrong place. The document showed a bigger area and an outer section of the building where the mages would receive visitors and test their abilities before either welcoming them or sending them away, depending on the results. Though it might be too much to expect that anything would be left of the mage's construction, the mountainside shouldn't have changed very much. This place was markedly narrower. She guessed there was another pass between another pair of mountains in the range, or perhaps Nala's suggestion was incorrect.
You silly goose,
said Fern.
This is it.
He squatted down beside her and pointed at the spot in the picture where the mountain slopes met.
The angles of the slopes are identical to how they are now.
Maybe,
but there's nowhere near the same amount of space. How could the mages have fitted that here? She prodded the curved protuberance with its wide double doors and window slits. The image showed 2 figures at the door, giving a clue to the building's size. There's no way there's room. He straightened up and gazed from one slope to the other. But it was so long ago, he mused. He thrust the toe of his boot into the ground, sending up a spray of rock shards and dust. "Hey!" Carina protested. "Watch out! This has fallen. This has all fallen from the slopes, weathered away by the elements. Do we know how long ago mages left Earth?" Cadwallader estimated it once. He said it was about 7,000 years ago, based on Jace's knowledge of the number of generations who had lived in our sector. Cadwallader? So that must have been before we were kidnapped by the Regians, and since then we've been forced even more light years off course. With time dilation, we can add at least another 1,000 years to the figure. 8,000 years! His chin tilted up as his attention focused on the surrounding mountains again. A lot of rock could have fallen in that time, enough to narrow the pass considerably. Carina got up, brushing rough pebbles from her backside. Could he be right? The angles of the slopes were the same. "You two!" Oriana called, stepping out from behind a rock. Carina hadn't noticed she'd disappeared. "While you've been slacking off, I've been working. I found a cave entrance. Come and take a look. It seems to go back really far." Chapter 14. The cleft in the mountainside was barely wide enough to pass through. They all had to take off their backpacks and edge sideways. Once they were inside, however, the gap quickly opened up. Carina found herself standing in a space the size of a small room. The ground was flat and sandy, and the walls... She stepped closer. The walls resembled others she'd seen before, on a planet far distant, half a lifetime ago. "This is it," she whispered. "They were here." The walls were smooth and polished, like the walls in the mountain castle on Ostalon, where she'd found the mage documents. Whatever cast had been used to create the surfaces, hollowing out the mountain's interiors, it had been forgotten as far as she knew. Certainly, Nine-Eye hadn't taught it to her, and neither had Ma taught it to her siblings. But the similarity was unmistakable. "Yay!" Oriana exclaimed. "We found it!" She hugged her brother and then Carina, but Carina couldn't return the gesture. All energy had drained from her limbs and she felt numb. "It's like the place the Dirksons took over, isn't it?" Fern asked. She nodded. "That's right," said Oriana, running her fingertips over a wall. "I remember now." She and Fern had been around 13 years old when they'd gone with Carina to find the documents. They'd fought alongside the Black Dogs, and they'd been present when Sable Dirkson had shot Darius. It was no wonder the place had left an indelible mark on their memories. "I need to sit down," Carina said. She walked to the edge of the chamber and slumped to the floor. Burying her face in her hands, she wept. "What's wrong?" Fern asked. "I would have thought you would be happy." "Oh, shut up," Oriana admonished. "She is happy. She's just having a moment." She sat beside Carina and put an arm over her shoulders. "Take as long as you like. We have all day to explore, and now we know where it is, we can come back whenever we like." Carina sniffed and mumbled, "Thanks." In fact, she wasn't sure she was crying with happiness. She wasn't sure what she felt. Images of Nine-Eye and Ma had flooded her mind, along with the faces of all the people who had died during their journey. She wished she could pull herself together and do what she'd come to Earth to do. But the ghosts of the past seemed to always drag at her, holding her back. "Have you noticed something?" Fern asked. "It's light. It should be much darker in here. There's hardly any light coming from the way in, but we can see perfectly well. The walls and ceiling must be faintly glowing." As he'd been speaking, he'd wandered around the chamber. "There's a way out," he said, as he reached a protuberance. "I'm going to see what else is here." "Wait," said Oriana. "We shouldn't split up." "Don't worry. If you can't find me, shout. And if I don't hear you, locate me." "Oh, he's so inconsiderate." "He's just excited," said Carina. "I'm feeling better now. Let's see what he's found." On the other side of the protuberance was an arched doorway carved into the rock. There was no question now that someone had lived here, if not the mages. And if it was the mages, had they left anything behind? The opening led to a tunnel with similar doorways at regular intervals. Fern was peering into one. "Nothing here, just empty rooms. I wonder what they used to be for." "What's that noise?" Oriana asked. "What noise?" Fern wrinkled his brow. "I can't hear a thing." "Shh! Listen!" Carina heard it too. A faint soughing, like the wind in a forest, rustling the leaves and branches. "Ah, yes," said Fern. "It's coming from that way." He strode down the tunnel, leaving Carina and Oriana hurrying to catch up. "Slow down," Oriana complained. "We're already exhausted from all the climbing." Typically, Fern took no notice. If anything, he seemed to speed up. "It's getting louder," he called over his shoulder. "We're on the right track." The tunnel sloped downward, diving deep into the mountain. In her hurried glimpses of the rooms they passed, Carina saw only empty, bare spaces. Whatever had once been inside had either been taken away by the mages or had decayed into dust. Meanwhile, the noise was growing louder and becoming more distinct. It didn't sound like the wind anymore. It sounded like... Whoa! Fern had halted at a portal larger than the others, seemingly transfixed by what lay beyond. A gust of cool, moist air hit Carina, and she knew her guess at what the noise was had been correct. She joined Fern at the opening. In a high cavern, the sides lit by the same glowing material that illuminated the place, a waterfall cascaded into a deep, dark pool. "This must have been why they chose it," Oriana said excitedly, clapping her hands. "An endless supply of water to make elixir." It had occurred to Carina on the way up that the mountain was a dry place, devoid of the brooks and rills she would have expected to see. It seemed clear that the majority of the snowmelt and rainfall in the higher regions was funneled inside the mountain, emerging into this cavern. "Marvellous," said Fern, stepping over to the pool. "I'm going to try some." "Are you sure it's safe?" Oriana asked. He stooped and scooped a handful of water into his mouth. After swallowing, he gasped. "It's freezing. I felt it all the way down to my stomach." He smacked his lips. "Tastes nice, though." "You're probably going to catch a horrible disease," said Oriana. "Or a parasite." "Why? The mages must have drunk this all the time." "They would have boiled it to make elixir and to drink too." He pulled a face. "Oh well, if I get sick, I'll heal myself." "Carina?" Darius was sending to her. "Hey, sweetie, what's up? Did you find the hideaway?" "We're pretty sure we did. We're here now, inside the mountain. It took us a while, but—" "I think you should leave." "Why? We only just got here." "I have a bad feeling. I don't know what it is, but it's coming from near where you are." "Who are you talking to?" Oriana asked. "It's Darius. He's saying we have to get out right away. He has a bad feeling." Fern scoffed. "He's always having a bad feeling about one thing or another. It's probably indigestion." "It might be something serious," Oriana replied doubtfully. "We should listen to him," said Carina. The twins might have forgotten Darius as a little boy saving all their lives more than once, but she hadn't. "Get ready to transport back to the shuttle." "What could possibly be dangerous in here?" Fern asked, opening his arms wide. We've only just arrived. There must be lots more to see. I'm not going to argue, Carina said. If you won't transport yourself, I'll do it for you. It went against mage code to cast on others without their permission, but when it came to protecting her siblings, she was prepared to make an exception. Fine. Fern snatched his elixir flask from its holder. We can always come back later, Oriana placated. There was movement on the far side of the cavern. 3 figures had appeared at the entrance. Who's that? Oriana had seen them too. Hurry up. Carina swallowed elixir, her gaze fixed on the figures. In her peripheral vision, she saw her brother and sister casting. One of the newcomers raised his hand and pointed. They'd been seen. Nothing of what was said on the other side of the cavern could be heard over the rushing of the waterfall. One of the men was doing something else. Closing her eyes, she wrote the character in her mind and sent it out. At the same time, she retained what she had just seen. The figures were all male. They'd been standing in the shadow of an overhang, which obscured them almost to silhouettes. She couldn't tell their ages or even what they were wearing. All she'd been able to see was the man pointing, and the other one, he'd been drinking from a container. Had he been casting? Had his cast activated before their own, transporting them to another destination? She opened her eyes. There was grass beneath her feet. The air was warm and dry. There were voices. "Carina," Oriana said. "You made it, thank goodness. Who were those people?" "Where's Fern?" she asked, turning. "I'm here. No need to tell me off," he added ruefully. "Darius was right and I was wrong." Darius was here too, and so was Shao. Beneath the camouflage sheet, a tiny piece of the shuttle peeked out. Everyone was safe. "I don't know who those people were," she said, "but one thing's for sure. They weren't there to welcome us with open arms. It's time we went back to the ship." Chapter 15. "You said we were from off-planet." Carina leaned closer to Matt, causing him to edge backward. "You don't believe humans have ever left Earth. Why would you say we're off-worlders?" His comment had come back to her as she travelled from Earth to the Bathsheba. I was being sarcastic." "Sarcastic about what? That we were off-worlders?" "Yes." "Carina," Darius said, "give him some room. Then maybe he'll be able to answer you properly." They were in the brig, where Matt had been taken after his discharge from sickbay. Carina moved away from his bunk and folded her arms. "Is this better?" Matt swallowed. "A little." Darius asked gently, "Can you explain why you made that comment? I didn't really think you were from outer space." The Earthman shifted in his seat and plucked at the cuff of his shirt. "Though what I've seen here has made me question that." Was he trying to mollify them, thinking that if he played into their Exodus testifier fantasy, they would treat him well? "I was referring to the general alert. You must know it," he added hastily. "Though of course if you really are aliens, you wouldn't have heard of it." "Just tell us what it is." "The general alert is the warning everyone learns at school, to be on the alert for aliens masquerading as regular people. When the sensors in the wood picked up the presence of humans who weren't chipped, we joked about it at the station." "Not chipped?" Before he could explain, Carina went on, "Oh, I get it. You have ID chips embedded in your hands." She'd recalled the police officers having their hands scanned. "Everyone on Earth has them?" "Nearly everyone. Every so often someone turns up who had theirs removed. People who want to disappear, for whatever reason. Sometimes they can't get a fake one, or it doesn't work. It's against the law, so we arrest them. Before we could process you, your friend killed one of my colleagues. Then things got serious." "We're sorry about that," Carina said. "You see, where we come from, violence is normal. Jackson was only trying to protect himself." Matt didn't answer. He probably thought she was indulging her delusion.
I'm interested in the general alert, said Darius. How long has it been in place? I don't know, since before I was born. And it involves being aware that aliens might be walking among you, disguised as human beings. Basically, how would you be able to tell who these aliens were? Well, for one thing, they wouldn't be chipped, hence the joking at the station.
What else? Asked Carina.
They would be able to do things humans can't.
Like? Darius prompted.
Like start fires spontaneously, open locked doors, disappear from one place and reappear in a...
He gave a small gasp. His wide-eyed gaze travelled from Darius to Carina and back again. He looked down.
No,
he said softly, as if speaking to himself.
No, it can't be.
He looked up and grinned nervously.
Neat trick.
Where does the warning come from? Carina asked.
I don't know.
You said you learned it at school. Does that mean it isn't serious? Is it a boogeyman thing?
No, it's serious. I guess it must come from the government. I never really thought about it, but I've seen the warning on websites, notices, that kind of thing.
If we give you access to Earth information channels, could you find an example? Hope bloomed in his features. You'll only be able to browse. Hope faded.
Okay, I'll try.
They left the brig and walked in silence. There was no need to state the obvious. The situation was the last Carina had expected. If she had discovered that mages were known about and feared on Earth, she would have been disappointed but not surprised. But a society prepped to hate and fear them? How had it come about and why? And why weren't they given their real name, rather than portrayed as aliens? She calmed Nala. Good trip? No. Oh dear. Maybe next, while you were looking at the Earth data, did you come across something called the General Alert? Doesn't ring a bell. I can do a search. What about warnings to watch out for aliens? No. Wait. Yes, I did see one. I thought it was a joke. Great. Could you check for the General Alert and anything to do with aliens with special powers? On it, Darius said.
We need to do something with Matt. We can't keep him here forever. He hasn't done anything wrong or tried to hurt us.
He locked us up.
He was only doing his job.
Well, what do you think we should do with him?
The next time we go to Earth, we should take him with us and leave him somewhere safe. He'll be able to make his way home.
But then what? He'll tell everyone about the Bathsheba and all the people on it, the aliens. Then everyone will be on the lookout for us wherever we go.
Will he tell them we're aliens? Or will he say we're a bunch of crazy Exodus testifiers who pulled a stunt on him? That's what he seems to believe.
He might believe that, but there's the evidence of us disappearing from the detention centre and Jackson disappearing from his cell a few minutes later. Matt might not believe what really happened, but he'll find it hard to explain those disappearances, and his superiors will expect him to explain. You can be sure about that. In fact, things might be even worse for him than we thought. I, brought him with us. The police might think he's colluding with us.
Darius mused. Didn't think of that. I guess he'll have to stay here a while, until we can think of a way of getting him home without creating problems for him.
Van Hasty appeared in the passageway.
I want to talk to you, Lin, face to face,
Darius said.
Oh, I'll see you later.
He often escaped when an emotionally charged moment was imminent, and from the merc's expression, it seemed this moment was about to be especially so. What do you want? Carina asked cautiously. I want to know exactly when the black dogs are going to set foot on the first freaking planet we've arrived at in years. It's too soon for you all to go down there, you know that. Is it? It might be too soon for you guys, but we don't have your agenda. There's no reason we can't have some R&R. There are plenty of reasons. For one thing, you don't have embedded chips like everyone else on Earth. The minute you try to go anywhere, get a job or whatever, people are going to start asking you some very hard questions. So what? We'll just say we're from off-planet. There's no law against it. You don't understand. We're going stir-crazy. We've been stir-crazy for years. Now the waiting's over and we're at our destination. We expect to get off the ship soon. If you keep stalling, something bad's gonna happen. Like what? Carina asked, putting her hands on her hips. Are you threatening to mutiny? Van Hasty's eyes narrowed. No one ever made you captain. You took that on all by yourself. It's hard to mutiny when you don't have anyone to mutiny against. Carina took a breath and exhaled. Van Hasty, like many of the mercs, could flip into anger on a trigger switch. It was time to de-escalate. If the black dogs go planetside, they could jeopardize everything we've worked for. As it is, our presence is a secret. I want to keep it that way for now. I need to figure some things out. As soon as I have, you'll all get your R&R permanently. It was a long way back to inhabited regions of the galaxy. When? How long is it going to take you to figure things out? I don't know. I can't give you a date. You've got a week, no longer. After that, we take things into our own hands. Van Hasty walked away. Hey, wait! You can't hand out an ultimatum. You don't even know the situation down there. 1 week, Lin. She was nearing the end of the passageway. I'll tell Shao to refuse to fly you down. We've got Bibic. And anyway, Shao isn't as much on your side as you might think. Van Hasty was gone. Carina's hands fell to her sides. Chapter 16. Fern and Oriana lounged on cushions on the floor. Parthenia and Darius were on Carina and Bryce's bed, and Nala and Bryce sat at the small table. Darius shifted sideways to make room. Do you want to sit here? No thanks, I'll stand. Carina knitted her fingers. Are you all sure no one knows where you are? Bibic doesn't know, Parthenia said, but I'm not happy about it. She'd been in a relationship with Shao's co-pilot for over 3 years. Nala and Fern also had serious partners, and Carina felt bad asking them to keep the meeting a secret from them. I appreciate whatever little white lies you've had to tell, and I promise this won't be forever, but I don't feel like we have a choice. The dogs are turning against us. If they knew we were holding a mages-only meeting, they might take it the wrong way. Bryce and I aren't mages, Nala said brightly. You're honorary mages, said Fern. Carina said, your family. Maybe that's what I meant. And Bibic isn't my family? Parthenia asked archly. You know what I mean. Please don't make this any harder. I've been doing my best to find a home for us, a real home, but it isn't working out. I need your help. We'll do everything we can to help you, said Darius. Just tell us what you need. That's the problem. I don't know what I need. I don't know what to do. Those 3 men turning up at the mountain hideaway and Matt's revelation about the general alert has thrown everything into question. Fern eyed her. You're positive you saw one of those men casting? 100%. I didn't. Did you, Oriana? She shook her head. Sorry, Carina, but all I saw was some shadowy figures. They could have been anyone, and they could have been doing anything. It was too dimly lit to see. When you say you saw one of them casting, said Bryce, what do you mean? Only, to someone who doesn't know what you're doing, it just looks like you're taking a drink and closing your eyes. That's right, Nala said. If I hadn't grown up with mages, I might not even make the connection between what you do and the effect of the cast. How do you know he wasn't simply drinking something? Don't you think that's a weird thing to do? Carina asked. You find some strangers in a cavern, and the first thing you do is quench your thirst? Parthenia shrugged. It isn't that strange. All right. Carina gritted her teeth. What about Darius's bad feeling about them? When has he ever been wrong? Can you tell us more about that, Darius? Did you get any indication of what the men intended, or anything else? Very little, sorry. The feeling was faint, due to the distance, I guess. Carina said, the fact that he felt anything at all at that distance tells me that at least one of those men is extremely malevolent. Perhaps they all are, and they wished us harm. How do you know? Parthenia asked. I just do. So you're a spirit mage now? Darius raised his hands placatingly. Let's not argue. We need to help Carina and each other if we're ever going to live on Earth. I'm just concerned that we act based on reality and don't allow ourselves to be spooked by meaningless shadows. We have enough problems facing us without inventing more. There are the ID chips the police officer mentioned, and the fact that the population is on the watch for evidence of casting. Exactly, Carina said. Doesn't that strike you as oddly specific? Who has been priming them, and why? It is odd, Parthenia conceded, but for now all it tells me is that we need to be careful. We can't give anyone cause to even suspect our abilities. But we've been forced to be careful all our lives. Earth is supposed to be our chance for something new. Perhaps, with time, we can introduce the idea that mages aren't anything to be feared, and that there's a lot we can do to help people, providing we're allowed to live our lives as we please. Stars, Carina muttered. Parthenia sounded so naive. Had she forgotten all the trials and difficulties they'd faced as mages in the past? Had she forgotten everything Ma had been through? Before that incident in the mountain, I might have agreed with you that was a possible way forward. Now it sounds futile and dangerous. It's clear that someone's been waiting for mages to turn up. Someone who wants ordinary people to view us as enemies. Think about it. Those men arrived soon after us at the hideaway. Somehow they knew we were there, and they came to challenge us. At least one of them is a mage too. If his cast had worked before ours, who knows what might have happened? His alleged cast, Fern commented. Whatever. I'll take that seat. She sank down between Darius and Parthenia. I found out some information about the general alert, Nala said. Shoot. The earliest instance I can trace occurred 51 years ago. It started in one country and gradually spread across the globe over 15 years or so. Now it's given out to most school children up to the age of 14. Then the public information notices take over. They appear where most adults would see them fairly regularly. It seems to be an effort at subliminal programming to be on the lookout for activity that defies known physical laws, as mages do. She added ruefully, transporting out of the detention centre as you did was exactly the kind of thing that would attract a great deal of attention, even more than it would somewhere the general alert didn't exist. Actually, it already has. I thought I would check for repercussions, and they're all over the place. The recording of the incident has gone viral. Your faces must have been seen by everyone on the planet. Fantastic, Carina said. So much for keeping a low profile. I'm glad we didn't go with you now, said Oriana. We would have been famous for all the wrong reasons, Fern quipped. Carina straightened up. I suppose there are warrants out for our arrest, Nala. What do you think? Fern said. It was lucky no one saw you or Darius when we went to the mage hideaway. Some people saw me, said Carina. The room fell silent. No one appeared to have anything else to offer the discussion. If they went planetside, they would be apprehended. If not on sight, then when it became clear they weren't chipped. It was a disaster. Everything was working against them, and it felt personal. It was as if someone had deliberately arranged things to make Earth the last place mages could live safely. She announced, "Whoever organized the general alert has to be connected to the people we saw inside the mountain. This is all too much of a coincidence." "How do you figure that?" Oriana asked. "Nala said the alert started decades ago. We've only just arrived." "I can't explain it. It just makes sense. Someone is out to get us, and they nearly did. If it weren't for Darius's warning, they would have succeeded. There's only one thing to do. I have to go back to the mountain. I want to find out who those men are, and to get to the bottom of what they have against us."
"That's insane," Bryce exclaimed. "If you're correct, you'll be walking right into their hands. And Darius has told us they're evil. It's a suicide mission."
"What alternative is there? Until I fix this problem, Earth is off limits. Our voyage will be a waste of time, and all those people who died to get us here will have died for nothing. I can't turn around and go back. I would be making those sacrifices meaningless." She swallowed hard and blinked away tears. Darius put a hand on her arm.
"They're gone, Carina. Nothing you do will affect them."
"It affects me." A second silence fell. "I'll go with you," said Parthenia. "What?" "I'm coming with you. As you said, we won't solve this mystery any other way. And if it comes to a mage battle, you'll need another mage on your side. I can repel his casts with repulse while you defeat him. I thought you said we shouldn't be spooked by meaningless shadows. And I meant it. How else am I supposed to discover whether I'm right if I'm not there to see it with my own eyes?" Carina hugged her sister. "It'll be like old times. Do you remember when we blew up the Twilight Dome with Mezban's bomb? How could I forget? It was the first time you didn't treat me like I was a silly little girl who needed protecting from herself." Ouch. If there was one thing Parthenia could be relied upon for, it was speaking her mind. "Those days are long gone," Carina said. "It'll be dangerous, but I would love it if you would come." Chapter 17. Everything was the same as before. The mountainside was quiet, except for the wind passing over the rocky slopes, and there was no sign of the men. Carina paused at the gap that led to the ancient mage hideaway. The atmosphere had taken on a different feeling. Previously, she'd begun to accept this really was the home of her ancestors. She had started to enjoy a sense of awe and wonder from being here. Then the strange men had arrived and forced her to flee. Now the dimness beyond the cleft seemed ominous and threatening. "This is it?" Parthenia asked, peering in. "We thought so. The shape of the slopes matches the sketch, only the pass is smaller. Fern thinks it's due to erosion. The outer keep is entirely gone, but Oriana found this entrance. What's inside is like the mountain castle on Ostalon, where we found the documents." "That doesn't sound conclusive." "No, but it feels right. It feels as though they were here." Parthenia didn't say any more, letting the skeptical vocalization stand. "And the walls glow in a way I can't explain." "That doesn't mean someone else can't explain it. Someone who knows about these things. There could be a perfectly rational explanation. And I've never heard of a glow cast. How would it last all these years?" Ignoring the unanswerable question, Carina said, "We saw the men fairly deep inside, in a large chamber with a waterfall. I don't know how they knew we were there. I'm worried that entering the cave set off an alarm, and that if we go in, we'll do the same, only this time they'll arrive faster. There could even be someone waiting for us. How do you know the men don't simply live in the caves, and your arrival spooked them?" "I don't know for sure, but everything from here to the waterfall was uninhabited. There was dust over everything. No one had been there in a very long time. And look around you. There's nothing here. How could anyone survive unless they were mages? Well, we want the men to arrive. We need to find out who they are. We do, but we have to be in control of the situation this time. No more surprises. They'd brought sidearms. The holster on Carina's hip felt awkward. It had been a long time since she'd been involved in a firefight, and though everyone on the Bathsheba had kept up with their training, she didn't relish the thought of engaging in armed combat. "Then why don't we transport in?" suggested Parthenia. "If walking into the cave triggers an alarm, we can avoid it. You can take us both to the waterfall." "All right, let's do that." Carina swigged elixir and sent out the cast. As she opened her eyes, the cool, humid air of the cavern hit her, and the thunder of falling water filled her ears. She had transported them to the place she'd been standing when she'd spotted the men. She checked the opening on the far side of the waterfall. It was empty. So far, so good. Parthenia was already stepping away from her, heading for the pool. "It's quite something, isn't it?" She had raised her voice to be heard over the waterfall's noise. "Shh," Carina urged, joining her and adding, more quietly, "It's possible someone heard us talking the last time we came here, and that's what alerted the men." "I very much doubt anyone can hear us over that." Parthenia nodded at the towering cascade. "Shall we explore further? I'd love to know what's through there." She indicated the opening where the men had been standing. "Me too, but we have to be careful." Parthenia's breeziness was making Carina uneasy. They skirted the perimeter of the wide pool. Translucent crustaceans crawled in the clear water of the shallows. The central area was obscured by mist. "I have to admit," Parthenia commented, "this does remind me strongly of the mountain castle on Ostalon. Feeling more persuaded I'm right? I never said you were wrong, but I know how much this means to you. It's easy to see evidence for something when you want it to be true." They'd reached the exit. Her pulse quickening, Carina signaled Parthenia to stay back. She drew her gun and peered out. An empty passageway crossed the exit, travelling in two directions. "Left or right?" Parthenia asked. The right-hand path sloped upward. On Ostalon, the mages had placed their documents in the highest part of the castle, in an open-air chamber commanding a view of the surrounding lands. Had the mages who had left Earth left something behind to tell their story? "This way," said Carina, turning right. She walked a little ahead of her sister, one hand on her elixir canister, the other holding her gun. Parthenia had drawn hers too. As before, openings led from the passage. Some revealed dusty, bare rooms. Others were the beginnings of more passages. If there had ever been doors to the entrances, they'd long since rotted away. A deep silence pressed in on Carina's ears, broken only by their soft footfalls. She almost began to believe the men had been figments of her imagination, but Oriana and Fern had seen them too. Why hadn't they arrived? Had transporting into the cave and avoiding the outer entrance really foiled them? "What's that?" Parthenia asked. "What?" "That, on the floor. Be careful." Carina looked down just in time to see an irregularity in the dust-covered ground. At the same moment she trod on it. She barely registered the faint striations on the uniform surface before a click sounded and the rattle of heavy chains burst out. A metal cage slammed down. Parthenia screamed. The edge of the cage had hit her feet. She collapsed, gasping, outside the frame, but the weight of the heavy metal pinned her. Blood oozed from her shoes. Carina was trapped inside. Her first instinct was to seize the bars, but she couldn't move them a centimetre. She began to come to her senses. She took out her elixir canister. She would transport them both out of here, back to the shuttle. Then she could heal Parthenia. "Ha," a voice said. "We knew you would be back. Can't resist the place, huh?" Carina turned. A tall figure was striding toward her, a female figure, but her stature was more like a man's. Had this been one of the people Carina had seen before, mistaking her as male? She was the size of Van Hasty and Pamuk. Now wasn't the time to find out. Carina lifted her canister to her lips, but before she could drink, she froze. As the woman walked closer, her face was revealed in the half-light. Carina's grip tightened on her container. "No need for that," the woman said. "Why don't you stay here a while?" She closed her eyes. She was about to cast. She must have drunk elixir before announcing her presence. Parthenia's whimpers were another distraction. Fighting her shock, Carina forced a mouthful of elixir down. It was a matter of who could cast faster. The woman had a head start on her. Should she cast Repulse and block whatever the stranger planned to do to them? Or should she go straight to Transport to take them away from danger? She had a better idea. She aimed and fired. She was standing on grass in sunshine. Parthenia lay on the ground, rolling in agony, her feet crushed and bloody. Carina fell to her knees. "I'm here, sweetheart. Just a moment." She placed a hand on her poor sister's ankles and cast heal, praying the elixir she had swallowed a few seconds ago remained effective. Gradually, Parthenia's moans faded. She relaxed onto her back and lifted a hand to her forehead. "That was awful. Are you sure you're better? Can I take off your shoes and check?" Irrational though it was, Carina wanted to reassure herself the cast had worked. "Be my guest." Parthenia sat up and inspected the damage. "Ugh, they're ruined. I only printed them yesterday." The shoes were soaked in blood. Carina carefully slipped them off. "You transported us out? I don't know how you managed it." "It was hard to concentrate, but I thought you would have your hands full. It never occurred to me the place might be booby-trapped." "Me neither." She removed Parthenia's blood-encrusted socks. Her feet were whole and unmarked. Carina took a deep breath and exhaled. "You're fine." "I know." Parthenia patted her arm. "You can relax. It was a good idea to shoot that woman. A pulse round is always faster than a cast. Did you get a chance to see if you hit her before you were transported?" "No. But if it wasn't a kill shot, she'll just heal herself. Or get someone else to do it for her." "Did you notice anyone else?" "It was as much as I could do to cast, dear. I wasn't making detailed observations." Carina chuckled. "Sorry." She took in their surroundings. Parthenia had transported them to within a short distance of the shuttle, where Shao and Darius waited. Though she didn't like the idea, they'd been forced to bring their youngest brother along to cloak the shuttle on their journey to Earth. "We should get back to our ride home." She began to put her sister's socks on, but Parthenia told her she would wear the shoes with bare feet. They began the short walk, Parthenia padding gingerly in her wet shoes. "There was no warning from Darius this time," Carina said. "The woman must have arrived after I triggered the trap." "Did you—" She hesitated. "Did you get a good look at her?" "From my position on the floor, looking past you while enduring unbearable pain, not a very good look, no." "So you didn't see her face?" "Carina, what are you trying to say?" You're going to find this hard to believe. Do you at least believe me now about the men I saw and that one of them was casting?" "I do. I admit you must have been correct. What new revelation do you have for me?" "The woman. She might have been as burly as a female black dog, but she She looked like Ma. Parthenia halted. Are you sure? It isn't the kind of mistake that's easy to make. But you were freaked out, and you must have been thinking about mages and our history and so on. Maybe she had Ma's face. She looked even more like her than you or me. I'm not wrong. And, Carina added with some heat, I'd appreciate it if you would stop doubting everything I say. I'm sorry, but I don't understand how that's possible. It isn't. Not any way I can think of. But it's true. Chapter 18. They were nearly at the shuttle. Carina thought she could see its faint outlines under the camouflage sheet, but there was no sign of Darius or Shao. Parthenia was peering about in a confused way too, and she opened her mouth as if to call out, but Carina put a hand on her arm, silencing her. Something wasn't right. She stepped off the track, taking her sister with her, and crouched in the undergrowth. Parthenia did the same, whispering, "What's wrong?" "I don't know." If the pilot and her brother were in trouble, Darius would have sent a message. "They might have gone for a walk," said Parthenia softly. "It must be boring waiting for us with nothing to do." Carina couldn't explain her feeling, so she just gave a shake of her head. She took out her elixir and swigged a little. "Darius, where are you? Is everything okay?" "Carina, thank the stars. They took my elixir. They knew exactly what they were." The sudden cut-off in his reply sent a shock-wave of alarm through her body. "Darius!" Parthenia grabbed her arm. "What's wrong? Has something happened to them?" "Sorry," Darius sent. "They're hurting Shao, trying to make her tell them where the shuttle is. Please help, Carina. I can't do anything without my elixir." "Where are you?" His description wasn't helpful. He and Shao had gone for a walk, as Parthenia guessed. All he could say was they'd walked roughly south for about 15 minutes, and they were surrounded by trees, exactly like everywhere in this place. If it were only a matter of transporting Darius out of danger, she could have done it. She had a fix on him, but not Shao. She couldn't transport the pilot unless she could see her, and it sounded as though hostiles were in close contact. She definitely didn't want to take any of them along by accident. "Hold on," she sent. "We'll be there as fast as we can." "What's happening?" Parthenia demanded as Carina opened her eyes. "Someone's got them." She peered out, checking for movement, but the forest was still. She slowly rose to her feet. Parthenia also stood up. "Who?" "No idea. But whoever it is, they know all about mages. They took Darius's elixir off him. And they know about the shuttle, but they don't know where it is." She left out the part about the attackers torturing Shao. "I only know roughly where they are. We can transport some of the way, but we'll have to be very careful. The woods must be crawling with people looking for us." "You think the woman we saw in the caves is connected to this?" "She has to be. It's all connected. Are you ready?" Parthenia nodded and grasped her arm again. "Take out your gun." "What?" "We have to be ready for anything." With a look of distaste, her sister drew her sidearm. Before transporting them, Carina checked the level of elixir in her canister. There was plenty, but, as always, her supply was finite. They appeared in a patch of open ground, a glade surrounded by trees. Instantly, they sank down. The sunlight was warm on their backs, and insects buzzed and crawled in the grass. "I can't hear anything," Parthenia whispered. "Can you?" Aside from birdsong and insect noise, their surroundings were quiet, except Carina strained her ears. "I can hear them." Easing through the undergrowth softly, she led Parthenia toward the faint sounds of voices. One was deep, demanding and insistent. The other was shrill with pain and fear. She couldn't make out what they were saying, but she was in no doubt the higher voice was Xiao's, and the other was her interrogator's. She hoped the pilot would resist a little longer. If the enemy found the shuttle, it would make escape trickier. Parthenia hissed, "I can see them!" An arching thorny stem had snagged Carina's pants. She put her gun away to carefully detach the stem before looking in the direction her sister had indicated. In between the tree trunks in the distance was a group of figures. She made out 10 or 11 gathered into a circle, facing inward. Shit! Xiao and Darius would be in the center, the objects of attention. If she could only see Xiao, she could extract her. But the men and women blocked her view. "We have to get closer." She took out her weapon and they crept on. Then she halted. "Wait a minute." She sank to her haunches, pulling Parthenia down with her, then swigged elixir and cast. "Darius, we know where you are, but I need a line of sight to Xiao. Can you do something?" "I'll try." "Thanks. Be careful." "Carina," whispered Parthenia, her tone strained. "I think we've been spotted." As she spoke, the cracking of twigs and rustle of bodies forcing a path through vegetation sounded from the rear. Only 50 or so meters distant, men were heading their way. Carina leapt up. "Run!" They sped toward Xiao and Darius. Keeping her focus on the group, she zigzagged through the forest, hoping to reduce her chances of being hit. Sure enough, pulse rounds hit the trees to each side, searing and scorching the bark. The scent of burning wood filled the air, soon followed by the snap and crackle of flames. The people holding Darius and Xiao had noticed what was happening. Pulses began to fly from that direction too. She was running from danger into danger. Where was Parthenia? Shouting erupted from the captors. There was a scuffle going on. Darius had to be creating the distraction she'd asked for. The group was breaking apart. She caught a glimpse of Xiao, and her heart lurched. The pilot was on her knees. Her hair glinted with wetness. Blood? She could get her out, but she needed a few seconds to make the cast. A few seconds she didn't have. The minute she stopped running and dodging, she would be shot or captured. Suddenly, from nowhere, Parthenia was at her side. "Do it! I'll cover you!" They halted near a bunch of ferns. Carina crouched down. Through the leafy stalks, she could just make out Xiao. The other hostiles had spread out and were heading their way. A pulse grazed the ferns, setting them alight. Parthenia was firing, sweeping her weapon to the front and back. "Hurry!" Checking Xiao's position again, Carina drank elixir and closed her eyes. Her sister's panting breath sounded in her ears. Heat glowed on her cheek. The fire in the fern was spreading. A shriek came from somewhere close by. "Xiao!" She cast. Hard deck was under her knees. The noise and heat were gone. "Xiao?" The pilot was curled on her side, holding her head, moaning. Her face was a mask of blood, dripping from cuts on her scalp, but she was alive. Darius was also here in the shuttle passenger cabin, but so were the men holding him. They stared wildly, their mouths gaping. Carina strode the 2 short steps required to reach them and shot 2 in the head. The third had time to raise his hands and mutter a plea before she shot him too. The awful scent of burned human flesh oozed from the bodies. "You probably didn't have to kill them," Parthenia protested. Always the pacifist. She had turned soft over their long voyage. "I think I probably did," Carina retorted. "Have you seen what they did to Xiao?" Darius dropped to the pilot's side. "Someone give me elixir, please." "Thank the stars it's all over," said Parthenia, handing him her canister. "I told them. I'm sorry." "You told them where the shuttle is?" Carina asked. The pilot couldn't answer, only grimace and nod. "I'll heal her," Darius said, "and we can fly out." Carina darted into the pilot's cabin and checked the sensors. People were moving toward the vessel. Seconds ago, the woods in this area had been empty. Had the people been transported here? She started up the engine. "What are you doing?" Parthenia asked from the doorway. "What does it look like?" "But we haven't removed the camouflage sheet." "No time." She jabbed a finger at the approaching figures. "Can you fly it?" "It's been a while, but I'll have to try. Tell Darius to cloak us as soon as he's finished healing Shao. And you all need to strap in." Parthenia disappeared. Carina gave a command, and her seat harness snaked over her, closing with a click. After setting the coordinates, she grabbed the controls and guided the shuttle upward. Resistance from the sheet registered on the display. She ignored it. Outside, the vessel would be rearing up from among the trees, ripping the cover from the ground, and the whine of her engine would reverberate through the forest. An alarm sounded, and the pilot's interface blinked. They were being fired upon, but she doubted the enemy carried more than small arms. As soon as Darius cast cloak, they would be invisible to their attackers anyway. While she flew them away, more pressing problems bothered her. Who was the woman in the caves, and why did she look like Ma? And how had someone guessed there would be a starship shuttle waiting for them in the woods? Chapter 19. Bryce was in the shuttle bay. Reading her expression as she descended from the shuttle, he said, "Another bad trip?" "You know that saying about the third try being the lucky one?"
Third time lucky."
"That's it. It isn't true."
"At least you all got back in one piece. That's the main thing."
Darius, Parthenia, and Shao were heading for the exit. "Hey," Carina called after them. "See you in the mission room in 15 minutes for a debriefing." No one replied as they left.
"That's a bit harsh. Maybe you should give them more time to rest."
"Time is exactly what we're running out of. The dogs gave me a week to figure this out before they take matters into their own hands, and we're one day down already. If they're let loose on Earth with no prep, can you imagine the carnage? Honestly, I don't care if they screw things up for themselves. That's on them. They're big enough and ugly enough to run their own lives, but I don't want them to ruin our chances of living peacefully and openly."
"What happened down there? You sound desperate."
"Ugh." She put a hand to her forehead. Where to begin? Before she could explain, a woman dashed into the bay. The last person she wanted to talk to right now, or ever. "There you are," Cheapy announced in a triumphant tone. "How come I haven't seen you since I came out of deep sleep? You've been avoiding me, right? I suspected you were hogging Earth all to yourself, and it's true. How many times have you been planetside now?" She got up close to Carina's face. "How many?" "Hogging Earth to myself? I'm glad to see you're over the effects of stasis. Things on the surface are tricky at the mo." "Don't give me that bullshit. You want to be the only person who gets to go down there and have all the fun. You, your family, and your cronies." She gave Bryce a look of disgust. "I won't stand for it. I never wanted to come on this stupid voyage in the first place. You tricked me into it, taking me away from everything I knew and everyone I loved." "We've discussed this 1,000,000 times," Carina said between her teeth. "You were the one who wanted to leave Sotloza. It isn't my fault you changed your mind at the last second. And if you'd stayed, there's a good chance you would be dead by now. So you really should be thanking me." "Thanking you? That's rich. You consigned me to living with thugs and weirdos, and I should thank you?" It had been a long, harrowing day. Something snapped. "Do you think I want you here? You nasty, whiny, stuck-up—"
"Let's go,"
Bryce interrupted.
"Gotta do that debriefing, remember?"
Cheapy's glare followed them out of the bay. If she had been even remotely intelligent, Carina would have been worried about leaving her alone with the shuttle. She was sufficiently stupid to try to fly herself to Earth in it. However, she didn't possess anywhere near the smarts to even start the engines. The worst she could do was injure herself trying, and Carina secretly hoped she did.
Am I a thug, a weirdo, or a crony?
Bryce asked as they walked down the passageway. All three, and an adorable thug, weirdo, and crony too. On their way to the mission room they encountered Chertang, who was creeping about surreptitiously, peering over his shoulder. "She's in the bay," Carina told him.
"Oh, thanks."
Chertang headed in the opposite direction. Van Hasty and Jackson had invited themselves to the debriefing. Carina eyed them as they came in and sat down. She didn't say anything. She had to concede they had a right to attend. "I want Officer Matt here too. Is he still in the brig? And what about Nala?" "She's on her way," Parthenia replied, "along with Fern and Oriana." Another attendee appeared, Ava. "I heard you were going to talk about Earth. Is it okay if I listen?" "Of course," Carina replied, mentally chastising herself for forgetting about the Marchonish women. They were so meek and mild, so self-effacing, forgetting them was easy. Ava was the most outspoken of the bunch, and that wasn't saying a lot. Jackson calmed the brig guard to bring Matt, and everyone waited. Nala came in with the twins. Lastly, the man from Earth arrived, wearing handcuffs. "I don't think those are necessary," Carina said to his guard, nodding at the cuffs. What exactly would Matt do in a room full of mercenaries and mages? And if he escaped, where would he run to? The guard unlocked the restraints. Jackson told him he would come when it was time for the prisoner to return to the brig. "Do you really need to keep him confined?" Ava asked. "I'm sure he won't do any harm." "That's just your opinion," Jackson growled. "And I'm entitled to it," Ava retorted, her eyes narrowing. "As his medic."
"I won't do anything," said Matt. "I promise. Anyway, I haven't done anything wrong. You don't have any right to lock me up."
Carina huffed in exasperation. "Oh, give him a cabin for Star's sake. We have more important problems than a deluded Earthman wandering around the ship."
"I'm the deluded one."
Matt gave a slight shake of his head.
"I don't think so, though I have to admit the effort you guys have put into this is impressive. You've learned a whole new language, built this fake ship, printed strange clothes. You've invented an entire history for yourselves too. You know, if you had worked as hard at something else, a career for instance, or a business, you could go far."
"What's he blathering on about, Lin?" Jackson snapped. Putting her face in her hands, Carina wondered if they should take Matt's translator and only return it when they were ready to speak to him. Bryce patted her back.
"Shall we start?"
Darius spoke first, explaining what had happened to him and Shao. His report was simple and didn't contain much more information than Carina already knew. He and the pilot had gone for a walk, imagining the woods were empty. They'd seemed empty until the men had pounced on them, and, before Darius had a chance to cast, they'd snatched his elixir canister. Then Shao's torture had commenced. Why no one had hurt Darius, who also knew the shuttle's location, hadn't been revealed. Parthenia then told the story of what had happened in the caves. The timeline of events showed that Darius and Shao had been attacked only minutes after the cage had slammed down over Carina. The connection was clear. "So after I sprung the trap," Carina said, "someone sent, probably transported, a team to the forest to find a starship shuttle. They knew that was how we'd arrived. Darius, did you get a bad feeling about a presence in the mountain like you did before?" "I didn't, but I was distracted by the attack on Shao and me." They wanted to prevent us from returning to the ship, said Parthenia. They wanted to cut off our avenue of escape and keep us on Earth. Carina took in a breath. There's something else to tell you. Parthenia can't confirm it because you didn't have a clear view, so you only have my word, but she focused on her siblings. I'm absolutely certain the woman in the caves looked like Ma. She looked like Mother? Oriana repeated. How? She just did. I can't explain it any better than you. Jackson said, You all look kinda alike, and you said the woman was a mage. It isn't that strange, is it? There are thousands of mages, Parthenia snapped. Probably tens of thousands, who look nothing like each other. Jace didn't look like us, did he? Fair point, Jackson conceded. What does it mean? Oriana asked, with a troubled expression. I don't know, Carina replied. In truth, on the shuttle ride back to the ship, she'd formed a suspicion, but she didn't want to air it, not without more proof. Her idea was outlandish, and she would sound unhinged, yet it was the only possible explanation. She turned to Matt. Have you followed everything so far? I understand what you've said, whether I believe it. Whether you believe it or not doesn't really matter. Just imagine that what we've been saying is true. Have you ever heard of anyone who can do the things me and my family can? Transporting to locations and healing injuries, for instance? Never. Or at least, not outside children's stories and vid dramas. Is it possible you just don't know about it? No way. Something like that would be big news. Parthenia said, So mages on Earth are living in secret, the same as everywhere else. Disappointing, but perhaps to be expected. Carina couldn't deny it. The situation is worse than that, said Nala. Not only do mages live in fear of persecution on Earth, a set of them are waiting for others to arrive from space, and whatever they intend, it isn't good. You don't trap people in cages or torture them to be friendly. They knew we would go there, said Carina. They know the mountain hideaway is the only place returning mages could go if they wanted to connect with the past. I discovered something that might be relevant, Nala announced. 53 years ago, the media reported that a starship had arrived from outer space and was in orbit around the planet. The reports were quickly discredited, and, from what I can tell, most were deleted. I only found a few, hidden deep in the archives. So some other mages made it back before us, said Fern. The group in the caves must have attacked them too. And had all news of them removed from public view, Oriana added. There's no reason to think they were mages, Parthenia countered. They could have been any returning colonists. Perhaps the information about the departure of colony ships wasn't lost, but is a deliberate attempt to erase history, Carina said. But why would the authorities not want anyone to know about people leaving the planet in the past? Matt, what's the general opinion about the possibility of colonizing other worlds? Is it something people talk about? Not seriously. If there are other habitable planets out there, they're so far away it would take several lifetimes to reach them. A space journey that long isn't practical. You've never heard of deep sleep? Carina asked. I mean, putting people into a state of stasis for years at a time, where they're only just alive. Sounds like science fiction. The tech has been forgotten, said Nala, along with starship engine drives. No one on Earth could build a colony ship, even if they wanted to. But the impression I get is that there isn't much interest. Earth people are content with their living conditions, and it isn't hard to see why. It's a peaceful place with little hardship. Most of the population lives a long, happy life. Sounds idyllic, said Oriana. It isn't idyllic if you have to hide an important part of yourself, said Carina. Van Hasty spoke for the first time. "I've listened enough. Me and Jackson came here to find out if there's a reason the Black Dogs can't go planetside. And all we've heard is mages this, mages that. You've got no reason to keep us here, except that our arrival might upset your little plan to live happily ever after doing your magic tricks whenever you feel like it." "I have to say," Ava interjected softly, "I agree. My friends and I have waited years to reach a place we can finally call home. Many of us are in relationships. All we want to do is settle down and raise children, and Earth sounds ideal." Though Van Hasty and Ava spoke separately, they voiced the sentiment from the non-mage contingent aboard ship. Lines between the mercenaries and the Marchonish women had become blurred over the years, as they'd fallen in love and formed partnerships. Carina's heart was heavy as she responded, "That isn't unreasonable. I want the same for my family. I'm just asking for a little time." Van Hasty stood up. "What you want could take an eternity. You've got 6 days, Lin. Come on, Jackson." The mercs departed. "I'll go too," Ava said. "Unless there's something else I should know?" Carina shook her head. "Matt, come with me. I'll find a cabin for you." Only Carina, her siblings and Bryce remained in the mission room. No one spoke. What was there to say? They faced a problem that could take years to solve, and they had mages actively working against them. The only thing Carina knew for sure was that however they tackled their anonymous enemies, it had to be done in secret. Any whisper of violent conflict related to their kind would tarnish their reputation forever among the ordinary, peaceful people of Earth, destroying the chance of mages ever living openly. The end. This has been Neverwar, Mage Saga Book 9, and the final book in the Mage Saga series. For more JJ Green books, visit jjgreenauthor.com.